Story 1.
Husband caught his wife cheating, plotted ultimate revenge, and delivered a deadly surprise to her affair partner. The sky held a deep darkness, visibility non-existent. Upon receiving the signal, 2 subdued shots were fired, causing 2 guards to collapse. Shots continued for the next 15 minutes. Once everything fell silent, the radio echoed. The building cleared, ready for evacuation. 14 years later, I found myself by the hotel room window, gazing at the sunset, reminiscing about how it all began and reflecting on how I ended up here. Sipping my vodka, the liquid burned as I swallowed, mirroring the memories of the past several weeks. Nevertheless, I held on to the hope that all was not lost. You see, 6 weeks ago, I stumbled upon the discovery that my wife of the past 12 years was having an affair. The revelation occurred by accident, but isn't that how most clueless husbands find out? By the way, I'm Logan. Jamie and I met during our junior year in college, dated until graduation. I joined the Marine Corps, and she embarked on a job search. Back then, I loved her, but didn't want her to marry me while I was stationed in who knows where. It seemed unfair to her. So, 5 years later, after completing my Marine service, I returned home and, within a few weeks, secured a good job with a large company in their sales group. It turned out my boss was also a Marine and had a preference for hiring former military types due to our disciplined work ethic. I excelled in my job, making a name for myself. During this period, I decided to re-enter the dating scene, exploring online sites. To my pleasant surprise, I found my college sweetheart Jamie on one of them. God, she looked good in those pictures. Now, Jamie may not have supermodel looks, but she possesses a body. In college, she pursued modern dance, prioritizing staying in shape, and what a shape she has. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with legs reminiscent of a dancer, she is not overly muscular but curvy, boasting an amazing figure. Her long, flowing, rich brown hair frames her face, accompanied by those dark brown eyes and a smile that melts my heart every time I see it. She exudes that girl-next-door look, sweet and innocent, with just enough sexiness thrown in for good measure. I signed up as quickly as possible and contacted her immediately. It wasn't until a week later that she responded, questioning where the hell I had been and why I hadn't called or emailed her over the last 5 years. If she was this upset at me for not contacting her during my Marine service, then she must have missed me. This was a very positive sign. Soon we were dating and essentially picking up where we had left off in college. Within a year, we were married, and a year later, we welcomed our first child, Rebecca. My job was progressing well, even though I found myself traveling more, which was anticipated. 2 years later, our second daughter, Amy, came into the picture. Since then, I've been promoted, and we now reside in a lovely house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. While I still travel quite a bit, sometimes for 2 weeks each month, it's a necessity for my job. It wasn't until a few years later that Jamie began questioning when I would reduce my travel. She missed my presence and felt safer when I was home. I explained that it was a necessary part of my job, assuring her that it wouldn't be much longer before I would be promoted to the next level, reducing my travel significantly and allowing me to be home more often. She reluctantly accepted this, but wasn't thrilled to see me go on my next trip. Looking back, I should have realized there was trouble brewing, but I fully loved and trusted my wife, making me blind to the initial signs of a problem. The first clue was our arguments over trivial matters. Upon my return home, she would blame me for things unrelated to me. If you were home more, this wouldn't happen, or we need you here, not gallivanting all over the country. She had a valid point, though it took me a while to realize it. The second clue surfaced when I found some of her new lingerie in the laundry. While searching for a shirt, I came across silk underwear and a matching silk top. My wife typically has simple tastes, opting for a t-shirt and shorts or sweatpants for bedtime. The only time I bought her something from Victoria's Secret, she wore it just once and never again. However, the lingerie I found was unfamiliar, and I assumed she bought it for herself. The third clue was the decline in our bed activity. Our once passionate and romantic encounters dwindled, with her offering various excuses, exhausted or not in the mood. It didn't initially seem problematic, and I believed things would return to normal once my travel reduced. I refrained from pushing her, aware that pressing the issue would worsen an already challenging situation. The final blow was devastating when first revealed, and I was hesitant to accept it. A mutual friend saw Jamie with someone at a farmer's market 40 miles away from our home. Initially thinking it was me, he observed them holding hands, laughing, touching, and kissing. When he approached, he realized it wasn't me. Sensing something amiss, he discreetly walked away, following them for a while until they drove off in a car. I still remember that call. My cell buzzed as I was leaving a meeting. Frank called me and informed me that he had something important to discuss. I told him I was in between meetings and couldn't talk, suggesting we could talk later. Frank agreed and asked me to call him at the earliest opportunity, expressing some concern in his voice. I assured him that I would and asked if the matter was urgent, to which he replied that it could wait. I hung up, not dwelling on the call, assuming Frank would have informed me if it were urgent. Later that evening, I returned Frank's call. I inquired about the reason for his call and what was so important. Frank hesitated before revealing that he had seen my wife out with another man earlier that day. I asked if she was with a friend, feeling a sense of nervousness. Frank struggled to convey the difficult news, stating that they appeared to be a couple, holding hands, laughing and kissing. He apologized for being the bearer of such news and suggested that my wife might be having an affair. Those words hit me so hard that I was left feeling numb. What made him think that? We were happily married, and she had no reason to. I couldn't complete the thought. Clues I had noticed earlier suddenly made sense, yet I resisted believing it. Frank brought me back, expressing that he knew it was hard, but I needed to be aware. He suggested there might still be hope to save my marriage and offered his support, telling me to let him know if I needed anything. I acknowledged and thanked him before hanging up, sitting on the bed and grappling with the reality, or potential cruel joke. As I pondered, anger intensified at the thought of my wife cheating. During the flight home, I began to cool down and think more clearly about what needed to be done. Without solid evidence, I didn't know where to start. Upon landing, my first call was to Frank, seeking details about the man she was with. Protecting my daughters from our issues was crucial. I wanted to salvage our marriage. Frank advised me not to do anything I would regret and shared that he had a friend who went through a similar situation. He suggested I talk to him for insight on handling the situation, emphasizing the importance of avoiding trouble or making things worse. Frank's advice resonated, and I realized I needed guidance from someone who had faced a similar situation. Right now, the best course of action is to head home and act like everything is normal. If she suspects you're onto something, it'll be tougher to gather evidence against her. I hope I'm mistaken, but I'm certain about what I witnessed that day. Frank was correct. Upon reaching home, I managed to compose myself enough to behave normally around Jamie and the girls. It wasn't a walk in the park, but I somehow pulled it off. In the following days, I searched the house for any clues of her affair, but nothing stood out. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted that I might be overlooking something. Frank called, suggesting I talk to his friend. I agreed to meet them at a bar across town the next day after work, keeping it from Jamie by mentioning late meetings. In the dive bar, I found Frank and his friend Mark in a back booth, nursing beers. Frank looked up as I sat down. Mark greeted me as the friend Frank had mentioned. We exchanged greetings, though neither seemed thrilled to be there. Mark spoke, having been briefed by Frank on my situation. He empathized with my feelings but warned against making the same mistakes he did, sharing his painful experience of revenge. It led to a 5-year prison term and losing everything in the divorce and lawsuit against his wife and her boss. He cautioned me against doing anything foolish, his gaze intense. I simply nodded, curious about alternative approaches. I inquired about what he would have done differently. Mark admitted he'd still go after the boss, but in a subtler manner to catch him off guard. He expressed deep contempt for the man who stole his wife. As for his wife, knowing what he knows now, he'd have opted for a divorce. Our conversation then delved into the do's and don'ts of my situation. The initial step was to secure damning evidence of my wife's infidelity to prevent any denial when confronting her. The second step involved consulting a divorce lawyer to understand how to protect assets and determine my rights in this situation. The third was to keep a substantial amount of cash on hand in case she discovered my actions and froze accounts and credit cards. Lastly, securing a small apartment or alternative living arrangements was crucial in case I decided to leave, ensuring I had a place to stay. While these suggestions were sound, I initially believed I could resolve the issue through conversation. However, as soon as I mentioned this, Mark pounded his fist on the table. Mark emphasized the importance of not doing anything stupid, pointing out that her new boyfriend might be filling her head with tales. He suggested that before approaching my wife, I needed to understand what she had been told and what she believed. Mark drew parallels to my military background as a Marine, highlighting the significance of good intel in battle. He stressed the need for a plan of attack and a strategy for when things go sideways, emphasizing the importance of knowing which way is forward. His question about my military service caught me off guard, and I confirmed that I was a Marine. I questioned the relevance, and Mark continued to stress the importance of having a plan and strategy, drawing connections to my current situation. I sighed, struggling to accept the possibility of my seemingly happy marriage coming to this. Mark apologized quietly, and we sat in silence until Frank broke it, asking about my plan and how I wanted to handle the situation. Realizing the necessity, I expressed my desire to salvage my marriage if possible, but more than anything, I wanted the other man to suffer without risking my own freedom. I made it clear that obtaining proof and intel on my adversary was a priority. Mark smiled at my last comment. He advised against hiring a private investigator, citing his own costly and unproductive experience. With access to her bank, credit card accounts, and phone records, he suggested checking for unusual purchases or calls. Additionally, exploring the possibility of a second cell phone and setting up hidden video cameras around the house for both visual and audio recording. Despite the discomfort, I agreed, determined to make him pay. Our conversation continued for another hour, during which I mentally noted the suggestions offered. Mark's advice emphasized the importance of not discussing the situation at work until I identified my wife's potential lover, considering the risk that someone familiar with my schedule might catch on. He also mentioned he would have approached his wife's lover more subtly, sparking my determination to devise a plan to outsmart this person. However, I needed more information and assistance. The next workday, I scrutinized my upcoming travel plans for the next month, discovering a 2-day trip. Concerned about someone at work knowing my schedule, I discreetly spoke with my boss, suggesting I might extend the client visit to a whole week. He approved the idea without hesitation. The subsequent step involved creating the illusion of being away while secretly returning. Using a prepaid debit card with cash, I purchased a return ticket on another airline. Online, I acquired several spy cameras and a regular camera with a powerful zoom and good low-light capabilities. This constituted the first part of my plan to uncover the identity of this person. The second part aimed to capture them in the act on video, eliminating any doubt of her infidelity. My day was dedicated to meticulous plotting and planning, a skill at which I excel. However, the crucial missing piece of information was the identity of the man involved. Until that was resolved, I couldn't trust anyone, not even my best friend and boss, Hal. Recognizing it would take time to unveil this person's name, I remained determined. By week's end, all the ordered items had been delivered to Frank's home. Now, I just needed the opportunity to discreetly install the spy cameras around my house. With Jamie's Saturday shopping routine with her girls and mother, the house would be empty. After several hours, all the cameras were in place and tested. I could even monitor them in real time from my tablet or laptop over the internet and observe what was happening. With the cameras installed, I proceeded to search the house for clues. Initially, I checked the credit card bills for any unusual charges, followed by an inspection of her closets to see if she had purchased any new, more revealing or shapely clothes. While my search didn't yield concrete evidence, I came across a few newer items, including a very short red dress I had never seen her wear before. The idea of her wearing it for anyone but me troubled me. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the red dress represented a departure from her usual attire, driving me to the point of needing time to think. I opted for a 5-mile jog in my running shorts and shoes, a long run that typically calmed my mind and provided clarity. Upon my return, as I arrived home, spotting Jamie's car in the driveway, I knew my daughters, whom I affectionately called my angels, were home. Their voices and laughter as I walked in never failed to bring a smile to my face. Calling out to Jamie, I was joyfully greeted by my girls, running from the family room to share their day. Jamie emerged from the kitchen, inquiring about my run and kissing me on the cheek before shooing the girls away. After dinner preparations, consisting of pork chops, I enjoyed a shower and our evening meal, followed by putting our girls to bed. In the family room, we watched TV, though my preoccupation with thoughts of Jamie's actions during my trips rendered me oblivious to the screen. Feeling overwhelmed, I announced an early bedtime, retreating to our bedroom. In the bedroom, noticing Jamie's purse on the hope chest, I took a chance and searched for clues. To my dismay, I discovered a cheap cell phone, previously unknown to me. Turning it on, I recorded the number and reviewed the call log, finding only one unfamiliar number, which I also noted before powering off the phone. This newfound evidence compelled me to finally accept the fact that she was having an affair. Heartbroken and consumed with a desire for revenge, I remembered Mark's advice not to act impulsively and resolved to be patient. Quickly changing, I went to bed, pretending to be asleep when Jamie eventually joined me, avoiding conversation to prevent unintentional revelations. The next few days were challenging, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy after uncovering damning proof. As the morning of another business trip approached, I went through my usual routine, packing my bags into the car. Just before heading out, I casually asked Jamie if she had anything special planned during my absence. receiving a strange look as she mentioned the usual routine. Racing through possible explanations in my mind, I bid a quick goodbye and drove to the airport, wondering if the cameras in our house would capture her with the person involved. Despite hoping for her decency to refrain from bringing him into our bed, I became increasingly certain that before all this, she would never have cheated on me. In the following days, concluding my work with the particular client in record time, I packed up, preparing to return home. That evening, I monitored the video feeds from the cameras but found nothing unusual. Consequently, I opted to review earlier recordings. The system initiated recording when someone entered the camera-equipped room, storing all footage centrally, accessible remotely. As I fast-forwarded through that day's recordings, I discovered a moment when Jamie was on her secret cell phone. I stopped and reversed the video to observe her answering the phone, then played it at normal speed. The audio quality was poor, but I heard enough. She was speaking to someone, referring to them as baby. They discussed my absence for the week and the logistics of meeting discreetly at a motel. Despite my urge to hear the rest, she laughed and turned her back to the camera, making it impossible for me to catch the entire conversation. When she turned back, she continued instructing the person to park down the street at a coffee shop a few blocks away. "Okay, baby, I can't wait. I'll see you tomorrow night." I couldn't believe what I just heard. He was going to be in my house and our bed. Thoughts of disposing of his body crossed my mind, but Mark's warning echoed, urging me not to do anything rash. Suppressing my anger, I resolved to wait for the right moment, though the strain was becoming unbearable. My wife, the love of my life, and the mother of our 2 children, was betraying me. Why was she doing this? What had driven her into the arms of another man? The flight back home was too quick. I wasn't ready for what awaited me, so I checked into a hotel, contemplating my next move. I knew tonight was the night he was coming to my house, and I wanted to see him with my own eyes. Was he someone I knew or someone from work? That much I needed to know to help me decide how to proceed. With no idea of what time he'd arrive, I knew he was going to park at the coffee shop down the street, so I waited there, even though I had no idea what he looked like. To be safe, I rented a car at the airport. Finding a spot with a good view of the parking lot, I brought my camera, checking the zoom quality. I could be at least 100 yards away and get a close-up view of his face and license plate. Around 9 p.m., a silver BMW M3 pulled into the parking lot. I began taking pictures, and thankfully, the lighting was good, giving me a clear view of his face. It was no one I recognized. He parked on the other side of the lot, away from the coffee shop, then started walking towards my house. I took a deep breath to control my rage. While sitting there, I accessed the Wi-Fi from the coffee shop, viewing the cameras in my house. After several minutes, I saw him enter and passionately kiss my wife. Suppressing my fury, I listened to their conversation. He expressed his thoughts about her all day, and they discussed having the house to themselves until the next morning, since she had sent the kids over to her parents for the night and I wouldn't be back until Friday. How considerate that she sent the kids away. I observed as he started undressing my wife right in our living room. She reciprocated, and in just a few short minutes they were undressed, with their hands all over each other. She suggested taking it up to the bedroom, and they both ran out of sight of the camera towards the stairs. As I listened to their laughter, leaving their clothes spread around the floor, I realized I needed to act. Lucky for me, I got out of my car and walked quickly down to my house. The front door was left unlocked as they hurried upstairs, making things easier for me. I went straight for his pants, discovering his wallet with all the needed information and a little extra. With his wallet in hand, I headed to my home office on the first floor, opposite our bedroom, minimizing the risk of being heard. Switching on my computer and the printer scanner, I waited for them to power up. Once ready, I began scanning items from Stephen Bannister's wallet, copying his driver's license and other details. After returning the wallet, I took pictures of their scattered clothes and started recording what I was witnessing with the camera's video feature. Quietly ascending the stairs as I reached the top, faint sounds of their lovemaking reached me, turning my stomach. The bedroom door was wide open and they believed they had the house to themselves. Slowly, I made my way toward the bedroom. With their voices getting louder, I found myself in the doorway, observing Steve on his back, undressed, with my wife on top, in the classic 69 position, pleasing each other. They were so engrossed that I managed a few steps into the room, unnoticed. Aware that the hidden cameras didn't offer the best definition, I desired high-definition footage. I recorded several minutes before resisting the urge to grab a baseball bat and attack him. Mark's wise words echoed in my mind, "Don't do anything stupid." So I backed out slowly and left the house, driving back to the hotel. My mind was a mess, and the hate I felt was at an all-time high. I couldn't remember being this mad, and it was starting to scare me. I called Frank, sharing what I had done and the information obtained. Frank acknowledged my actions but expressed concern about the risk of being in the house again. He apologized for the situation and offered any help he could provide. I thanked him and mentioned my need to talk with someone and my intention to ask Mark for a favor. Frank agreed to arrange a meeting with Mark over the weekend, as Mark had expressed a willingness to help. After the conversation with Frank, I attempted to sleep without success. I decided to clear my mind and work off the rage with my usual morning run. However, it did little to ease my emotions. Following the run, I took a shower and then a long nap to cope with the lack of sleep from the previous night. Returning the rental car to the airport, I picked up my own car and headed straight to the office to check in and talk with Hal. I needed to reduce my work-related travel, and upon entering Hal's office, I closed the door and informed him about my situation. I mentioned my wife's desire for me to be home more and expressed the need for changes in my travel schedule. I looked at Hal, awaiting his response. Hal informed me that my promotion had been approved and I wouldn't have to travel as frequently anymore. It was a welcomed relief, although I couldn't fully grasp it at the moment. My mind was consumed by the knowledge of my wife's affair. Hal noticed my distraction and expressed concern about my recent behavior. I felt compelled to confide in him about what I had discovered. I told him about catching my wife with her lover and recording them together. Hal reacted with shock and sympathy, offering his support. I explained that I needed to be home more to salvage my marriage, and I asked him to keep the situation confidential, fearing someone in the office might be involved in leaking information about my schedule. Hal agreed to cover for me if I needed time off to gather evidence against my wife. I expressed my desire to confront her with undeniable proof, to either salvage the marriage or protect myself in a divorce. Hal nodded in agreement, promising his assistance and discretion. After thanking Hal, I left his office, feeling a bit relieved that things were falling into place, even though deep down I knew my marriage was beyond repair. I went home that night and tried my best to act normal. My girls attacked me as I walked through the door, and I had to keep from crying, thinking how they would be affected if a divorce were to happen. I didn't like the idea of having to get permission to visit my own children. I have to get custody of my kids. On Saturday, while my wife and kids were out shopping, I met with Mark and Frank at a diner. I updated them on the progress I'd made in gathering information. Mark remarked on my courage and expressed surprise that I hadn't taken more drastic action. He then asked how he could assist me, mentioning Frank's mention of my time spent in prison. Both Frank and Mark regarded me with curiosity. For the next hour, I explained my plan and outlined what I hoped to achieve with Mark's connections. When I finished, Mark smiled and expressed admiration for the plan. He mentioned knowing someone who could potentially assist me and suggested they might be able to recommend others, though he cautioned that they would likely expect payment. Mark agreed to make some calls to his contacts. I handed him my cell number and asked him to contact me once he had spoken with his friends so we could arrange a meeting to finalize the details. After discussing a few more ideas, I planned to implement them as soon as possible. I realized I needed to make some additional online purchases to prepare for the next phase of my plan. The rest of the weekend went the way most weekends go, with one noticeable difference. Sunday night, my wife and I usually make love. That night, this time, she wasn't feeling well. It wasn't the first time this happened, so it was not surprising, but it had been over a month since the last time we were close. My next trip was coming up, and I asked Hal for the following week off, but if anyone called the office, they were to be told I was on a normal business trip. He had no problem with that and wished me luck. So now I had to let my wife know my next trip was going to be longer. She was not happy, but that was to be expected. I reassured my wife that my frequent traveling would soon come to an end and that I would be home more often. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked that I would be around so much she'd get tired of me. However, she didn't respond with a smile. Instead, she sighed and told me to call her when I arrived at my destination. Her demeanor was distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. I rushed out the door before I said something I'd regret and drove to the airport again. The meetings with these clients went very well, and a deal was reached early, so I was able to fly back a day sooner. I kept checking the cameras during the week, but he didn't reappear at my house. But I did see her on that secret cell phone of hers, so I listened to her conversation, and I knew this was the opportunity I was looking for, even though it shocked me to hear what she was planning on doing. I went to the office and found the items that I had ordered waiting for me. Knowing my wife's normal routine, I could easily set up one of these items that I got with little chance of being caught. She went to the gym 4 times a week, and I knew where and when. So, I had her spare car keys and was able to place the item where she wouldn't find it. Next, I went to Steven's condo to see if he was there. I saw his car parked in the carport, so I assumed he was home. I brought my camera and was checking if I could see him inside. I got very lucky as I saw him through his sliding doors, and that he wasn't alone. He was with another woman, and they seemed to be romantically connected, as they were kissing and touching each other like a loving couple. This was too good to be true, as I took a video of their affection for each other. When I saw them leaving together, I followed it at a safe distance. They went for lunch, and this gave me a chance to place the other item on his car. This was a little more difficult and dangerous if someone saw me, but I was able to do it without being caught. Now all I needed to do was wait. That was the hardest thing for me to do. I received a call from Mark, who informed me that he had a friend who could assist with my plan. We decided to meet in my hotel room to avoid being seen together in public, considering the nature of the activities we were planning. When they arrived, Mark introduced me to Joe, a computer hacker who could help with our scheme. Over the next hour, I recounted the details of my wife's affair and expressed my desire for revenge against her lover. I showed them copies of the contents of the man's wallet that I had obtained. Joe raised concerns about the legality of our plan and demanded to know what was in it for him. After considering for a moment, I offered Joe $5,000 in cash. He agreed to the terms, but insisted on receiving half of the payment up front and the remainder upon completion of the job. We discussed the need to gain access to the man's condo to access his computer and gather additional evidence against my wife. With the intel I had on Steven, Joe used my laptop to review his recent purchases. What stood out were the 2 airline tickets to Las Vegas and a hotel reservation for 5 nights. This signaled our decision to break into his condo, prompting Joe to ask if I knew whether there was an alarm system. I admitted uncertainty, so Joe agreed to investigate and get back to me. If an alarm system was present, he insisted on an increased payment for facilitating our entry. I agreed to pay him more, contingent on justification. It appeared my wife was planning a final trip with this individual. I checked my tablet to confirm the functionality of the tracking devices I had placed in their cars, accessible via my tablet or smartphone to monitor their locations. Additionally, I examined home video cameras, confirming she had packed a small carry-on bag for the trip. The day arrived, and I monitored their progress from my hotel room. I called Joe, and he agreed to meet later that afternoon. While he hadn't identified any visible alarm systems, he emphasized the need for caution. We met a few blocks from Steven's condo and discussed the plan for gaining entry. Joe, drawing on his prison experience, possessed the skill of lockpicking. It was just after sunset, and the growing darkness would help maintain discretion. Joe, with his laptop in a messenger bag, and I, with my camera, arrived at the front door of Steven's condo. Joe immediately knelt down and worked on the locks. After almost a minute, the door was open, and we entered, first checking for any signs of an alarm system. Satisfied that none existed, we proceeded to locate Steven's computer. Fortunately, it was openly accessible, allowing Joe to carry out his tasks. I interrupted, saying, "Wait," as I slowly recorded a video of the room's layout. "I want to ensure we leave everything as we found it." Joe nodded in agreement, acknowledging the importance of leaving no traces behind. He resumed his work as I explored for potential incriminating evidence, browsing through his mail, including bank statements and credit card bills. I ventured into his bedroom, capturing video footage. The remarkable cleanliness and high-end furniture suggested affluence, leaving me still uncertain about his profession. Joe's exclamation of "pay dirt" brought me back to the living room. He had successfully accessed Steven's online bill payments, discovering checks and extra credit cards. I was pleased, having brought a card reader to record information from the magnetic strip. Joe proposed making copies for online purchases, potentially maxing out his cards in a few hours. Joe grinned and inquired if it was possible to empty out the man's bank account. I confirmed that it could be done, intending to carry out the transaction from the man's computer to make it seem legitimate. Joe mentioned the possibility of the bank calling to verify the transaction, but assured me that no password was necessary, as I had already copied the man's social security number from his wallet. I chuckled at the man's carelessness and gave Joe the go-ahead to proceed. Expressing my desire to inflict maximum damage on the man, I suggested emptying his bank account immediately and sabotaging his credit cards on the day of his return from Las Vegas. Joe enthusiastically agreed, referring to it as a fitting homecoming gift. He emphasized the importance of covering our tracks to avoid any repercussions. I reassured him that we were taking precautions to avoid detection, pointing out the latex gloves we were wearing as evidence of our caution. I went back to search through his bedroom and didn't find much until I looked in the back of his closet. I found a shoebox with several recordable DVR discs. They were labeled with the names of women. As I pulled out the box, I dumped it on his bed and started to sort through them. I didn't recognize any of the names until I saw Jamie, That idiot had recorded the two of them together, but why? Joe called me over to the other room to show me something he had found. He explained that the man we were targeting was involved in blackmail, possessing numerous videos of women with Stephen. These videos showed the women's faces clearly, but Stephen's face wasn't always visible due to the camera angles. Some emails indicated that the women were being extorted for money, with threats of using the videos against them in court. Joe speculated that Stephen preyed on married women with children, exploiting their vulnerabilities for his gain. Seeking retaliation, I asked Joe if Stephen kept all the videos on his hard drive. Joe replied that he wasn't certain, but suggested that the DVDs found in the closet might contain the only copies. I decided to gather the DVDs and search for a backup drive, but couldn't find one. Returning to Joe, I learned that he had located the backup drive. After instructing Joe to do a full backup and wipe the laptop's drive, I explained our plan to bankrupt Stephen by ruining his blackmail scheme. I also expressed my desire to inform the women involved that they were no longer under threat. I asked Joe to print out all relevant emails so I could set up an email account to communicate with them. He offered to set up the account from Stephen's computer, and I agreed to the idea. After wrapping things up, I did one last sweep of the place before we locked up and departed swiftly. Back at the cars, I gave Joe an envelope containing the remainder of his payment, expressing my gratitude for his assistance. We shook hands, and he assured me he'd be ready to carry out the next phase of our plan when needed. With that, he drove off, and I returned to my hotel to continue implementing my scheme. I called my in-laws to check on my children. My father-in-law answered, and I greeted him cheerfully, inquiring about the kids and expressing my hope that they weren't causing any trouble. He reassured me that the children were behaving well and mentioned Jamie's weekend trip with her friends. I feigned ignorance and said I hadn't spoken with her, yet emphasizing that I wanted to ensure the kids were settled before contacting her. After our conversation, it was evident that Jamie's father had no knowledge of her affair in Las Vegas. It further solidified my disdain for her actions. My next call was to the house, which I knew she wouldn't be at, so I left a message. Then I waited an hour, and when she didn't call me back, I called her cell again. She didn't pick up, so I left a message saying I was worried, that I had called the house and she didn't answer or call me back, and now she wasn't answering her cell. Please call me, just so I know you're okay. I also added that if I didn't hear from her within the hour, I was going to call her parents. 15 minutes later, I received a surprise call from Jamie. She asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she had tried calling the house but received no answer. I assured her that everything was fine, explaining that I had taken the girls to my parents' house after spending time with friends. Jamie's response sounded somewhat tense. I suggested we have a night out together once I returned home in a week, but her response seemed uncertain. Feeling suspicious, I pressed Jamie, teasing her and attempting to make her nervous. She claimed to be tired and hinted at wanting to end the conversation. Respecting her wishes, I bid her good night and expressed my love before ending the call. Despite my efforts to remain calm, anger began to resurface within me. I didn't sleep well, so I was up early doing my morning run. I got back to my hotel room and took a nice long shower. Afterward, I called the office and checked if anything needed my attention, but all seemed to be going smoothly there. Then I got the call every parent fears. Rebecca was injured at school and had to be taken to the hospital. At that moment, nothing mattered to me more than the safety of my child. The school had called my house first. When no one answered, they tried calling me at work, which in turn led to someone from my office calling me. I called the school back, and they informed me she had broken her arm and was at the emergency room being treated. I rushed out the door and went straight to the hospital. Once there, I called Jamie's cell, and when I got her voicemail, I screamed into the phone that if she didn't call me within the next 15 minutes, the next call I made would be to a divorce lawyer. It was an hour later when my cell rang. I saw it was from Jamie. I rejected the call and sat with my daughter as the doctor set her arm in a cast. She was crying, saying she wanted mommy. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. It took some time, but she finally settled down and I took her to her grandparents. My phone rang again and again. I rejected it. When I had calmed down, I made a call to a good divorce lawyer and set up an appointment for the following day. Then Jamie called again. I took this call. She greeted me, sarcastically commenting on my supposed luck at the blackjack tables, and informed me that she had contacted a divorce lawyer. Through tears, she threatened to use the video she had of me and Stephen together as evidence to gain full custody of our children. I reminded her of her absence when our child was in the hospital crying for her mother while she was with her lover in Las Vegas. Attempting to reassure her, I suggested that she could start a new life with Stephen and potentially have more children. She insisted that it was me she loved and wanted. Feeling conflicted, I ended the call, unable to bear the emotional turmoil. I took Rebecca and Amy home, helped them pack their bags with some clothes, and brought them to my hotel, getting them their own room next to mine. Then I called Jamie's father and told him what happened at school, and that for the time being, we wouldn't be living at home until some things could be resolved. My father-in-law called and asked about the situation between Jamie and me. I explained that we were having some problems, but suggested he speak with Jamie for more details. He informed me that he would be taking care of the girls for the time being until he was sure of their well-being and safety. Although he didn't fully understand, he wished us the best and hoped we could resolve our issues. I then contacted my lawyer and instructed him to proceed with serving my wife. Next, I called Mark and instructed him to wreak havoc on Stephen by maxing out his credit cards, emptying his bank accounts, and damaging his credit. Later that night, Jamie called me in distress. Initially hesitant to answer, I eventually did after receiving a text from her. She tearfully explained that Stephen was blackmailing her, threatening to share videos of them from Vegas with others. I responded coldly, suggesting that she had brought this upon herself by engaging in the affair. I hung up, knowing that Jamie needed to face the consequences of her actions. She had chosen to leave her home and marriage for her own pleasure, and now she would have to face the repercussions. After deciding to end things with Jamie, I needed to address her lover, Stephen. I called Mark and informed him that I had contacted my lawyer to have Jamie served with divorce papers, which would take a few days. Meanwhile, I wanted to move my money offshore, ensuring that only my funds were protected. Mark questioned my decision, but I assured him that I was done with Jamie and was determined to give her what she deserved. Mark mentioned a change in plans and suggested meeting at 5. We convened at a dive bar and engaged in a lengthy conversation that lasted almost 2 hours. Before parting ways, we shook hands, and I handed him a substantial envelope. For the next 3 days, Jamie kept calling, and I kept ignoring. I wanted her to suffer. Friday evening, I got the call I was eagerly waiting for. It was a video call. I answered. On the other end, there was a man tied to a chair and all bloodied. A voice in the background informed Stephen that his friend had a message for him. Stephen, looking at the screen, was addressed by someone who mentioned his recent trip to Tijuana and the exhaustion that must come with it. The speaker hinted at Stephen's financial troubles and suggested that his current situation would help him hide from the bank. The speaker continued, mentioning someone named Santiago and his special stew, hinting at a sinister implication. They explained that they could have pursued legal action against Stephen for alienation of affection but opted not to waste their time. The message concluded with a farewell to Stephen, indicating that someone named Mr. Lopez was now involved. I saw Stephen for the last time that day. In his eyes, I saw fear. That is what I call a good investment. Stephen was still alive when he was lowered into the giant blue drum filled with Santiago's special mix. No one ever heard from him again. No one even asked about him. 7 months later, I was a free man. I got custody of my daughters. I get to keep the house until both my daughters are grown, and then we can sell and split the difference. There was no alimony or child support. I wanted nothing to do with Jamie, but she has visitation rights, and I usually drop the daughters at her place and drive away. A year later, I started dating Lisa. She was previously Amy's school teacher, and it seems that Amy likes her company more than her mother. I have not decided on getting married, and I'm taking this slowly.
Story 2.
Why would she betray me like this? How could she betray our family? These were my initial thoughts when I woke up the next morning in a hungover haze. I am Jonathan Fremont, and until last night I believed my wife, Susan Fremont, was a devoted spouse and my true love. As it turns out, she is indeed a loving wife, but only in practice, with her lover, not with me. She revealed that she's been cheating on me for about a year and expects me to accept it. Absolutely not. I struggled to control my anger and revisited her words from the previous night. She claimed to love both him and me, yet she insisted on spending more nights with him, leaving me with no say in the matter. She explained that he's a divorce lawyer and she was merely assisting him. That was nonsense. She confessed that he was her divorce lawyer if I didn't comply with her wishes. Oh hell. Having seen enough courtroom dramas on TV, I knew this was a significant conflict of interest that could lead to his disbarment. I smirked. However, my smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. I still didn't know the identity of this guy, and extracting information from Susan seemed impossible without resorting to extreme measures. I briefly contemplated taking drastic action against the unfaithful doxy, but then I thought about my children. She is their mother, and I couldn't subject her to that. Upon reconsideration, I went over the situation again. If I didn't play by her rules, I would end up paying for her and her lover's life at my expense. I remembered a friend who had gone through a divorce and shared his strategy at the bar one night. He emptied his accounts, leaving his cheating wife with nothing to hire a lawyer. Although she secured pro bono representation, she ultimately lost to my cunning friend. However, the key difference was that he didn't have kids, whereas I do. This meant I might have to pay child support at the very least. As far as I knew, she wasn't bringing him to our house, indicating that she was likely going to his place. Curious, I called my in-laws and had a conversation with my mother-in-law, who greeted me warmly, unaware of her daughter's unfaithfulness. I casually inquired about their usual babysitting routine, to which she informed me that they usually took care of the kids 3 or 4 times a week, from 8 to 5, while Susan volunteered at the homeless shelter and food bank. Learning that Susan was deceiving even her own parents saddened me. I expressed my gratitude and mentioned that I wanted to surprise Susan next week, asking my mother-in-law not to reveal my plan. She fell for my feigned cheerfulness and assured me she wouldn't say a word. I thanked her and ended the call, saying goodbye and wishing her a great day. I examined myself in the mirror. My hair wasn't thinning as much as I feared. I shaved, combed my hair, and indeed had more hair than Detective Stabler on SVU. Now the beer gut had to go. Despite Susan's hurtful comments the night before, she was right about that. How did I let myself go like this? All that overtime working 160 hours a week to provide for my wonderful kids and my unfaithful wife. I loved my kids. My feelings for my wife were not as strong as she wanted me to believe. First things first, I initiated the cancellation of all our joint credit cards and ordered replacements in my name exclusively. Following that, I contacted my branch manager, directing him to transfer everything from our shared savings and checking accounts into a checking account solely under my name. Automatic bill payments were also terminated. This is self-defense, ladies and gentlemen. My wife's contempt and disrespect were evident as she deceitfully portrayed me as defenseless in our impending divorce. She declared war, and it was her mistake. However, her lawyer advisor guided her on what to say. Lawyers and cops share tactics, strong-arming and intimidation, to dissuade ordinary individuals from resisting. Cops resort to it when facing a valid complaint, while lawyers employ it for out-of-court settlements. They both underestimated me. Despite being just a diesel mechanic, I'm not foolish. Having spent 4 years in Army CID, I could have pursued a career as a cop or a private investigator. Yet my passion lay in working on engines, specializing in diesel engines even as a shade tree mechanic. Now a certified diesel mechanic, I earned decent money with substantial overtime at time and a half. Dressed in sweats, I jogged to clear my mind, and admittedly, to shed some of this beer gut. Post-jog, I called my boss, informing him of my need to take a couple of weeks of vacation time to navigate a family crisis. He granted approval, and then it was time to fine-tune my plan. Violence was inevitable, and there would be bloodshed. I knew that much from the start. There was a chance of ending up in jail, and I aimed to avoid that. With CID experience, I knew some tricks, but it would still be tricky. Shopping was next. After showering and changing, I ventured into town. Anticipating winter, I acquired soft gloves, a black turtleneck, and a ski mask without a mouth hole. Oakley shades with a matte gray finish and matte black frames completed the ensemble. Walmart was a convenient stop. Yes, I was going to have a lot of fun once I identified the culprit. Then, I visited our local ISP shop, obtaining voice-activated recorders and a GPS system with extended life batteries. Cameras could wait. A gym bag for new clothes and matty black steel-toed work boots were also on the list. Not a stretch, considering my old work boots were worn out. That was fine, though. The new boots would replace the old ones. A sporting goods store provided an aluminum baseball bat and a large gym bag. Deciding to purchase a sport girdle for my gut, just in case, I didn't want to be identified by my gut. That was for sure. I ensured I paid cash for everything, avoiding a paper trail from a credit card traceable back to me. Then came the hard part, playing the submissive husband when my cheating wife got home, whenever she decided to get home, that is. I wouldn't capitulate right away. Susan knows me, and she knows how bullheaded I am. I stayed out all day until what would have been quitting time, not wanting the witch to suspect anything yet. Entering the house, she wasn't home. Well, screw it. I tried her cell phone, but it was off, going straight to voicemail. Urgent, I left her a message, specifying the time and date, insisting she call me ASAP. Time to mess with her head a little bit. 2 hours later, she called, and the kids were still at their grandparents' place. She sounded out of breath, expressing concern about the situation. In response, I opted to sound a bit broken up and urged her to come home immediately, emphasizing that it was about the kids. I sobbed for effect and then hung up. Susan rushed home and arrived in less than 10 minutes after my call, entering the room from the garage. Observing my pale appearance, she anxiously inquired about what was happening, expressing fear for the children. In a harsh tone, I snapped, questioning her concern and accusing her of being too preoccupied with her lover to worry about the well-being of our children. My voice dripped with venom, and my eyes reflected intense hatred. I revealed that the marriage was over, but before concluding it all, I wanted to mess with her head. I highlighted the 2 hours during which her phone was off after I had called her upon returning from work. I questioned her priorities, asking if her lover was more important to her than our own children. Overwhelmed with emotion, Susan collapsed on the living room couch, sobbing pitifully. I questioned in a lower tone, pondering the hypothetical scenario of me being in the place of the children. I wondered aloud if she would care as much, or simply call her parents to extend the kids' stay, allowing her more time with her boy toy. Despite her red, tear-stained eyes, Susan looked up at me defiantly and insisted that it wasn't like that, sobbing in the process. Expressing disbelief, I accused her of using our children as weapons against me. Slowly shaking my head, I clarified that my intention was not to do that, but rather to make her realize the potential consequences of her actions. I questioned how she would explain being 2 hours late for something important and how we could keep such incidents a secret when her phone was off. I also highlighted the possibility of emergencies with her parents and the kids trying to reach her. Unable to fathom her actions, I maintained a low, even tone, stating that she had done this to herself by getting involved with her boyfriend. I expressed missing my wife and emphasized that the kids missed their mommy. Despite her parents' love, they loved her more, causing her to pale. Deep down, she knew I was right, but her stubborn pride prevented her from admitting it. In response to my observations, Susan shrieked, her face reddened with rage and a hint of guilt. Guilt seemed to be the main source of her fury. I calmly stated that if she attempted to divorce me, she would leave me ruined and broken, as she sneered at me and declared her intent to go back after showering. As she headed back toward our bedroom, I thought, there is a God. In the master bath, I acted swiftly, grabbing the GPS and a voice-activated recorder before heading to her car. I concealed the voice-activated recorder under her seat and the GPS under the passenger seat. With receivers for both on me, I could track her movements and hear her conversations. The signal range was 10 miles, ensuring I wouldn't lose it unless she went to the other side of town. Dipfucker's reckoning was imminent. After planting the devices and testing the receivers, I pocketed the voice receiver and placed the GPS receiver in my Ford F-250 diesel. Seated inside the truck with my head in my hands, I observed Susan emerging, dressed to impress. Pleading with her, I expressed my desperation, asking her not to go through with it and not to damage our family. Her expression softened as she conveyed her apologies, stating that she truly loved me, but emphasizing that the other man needed her. In response, I confronted her, pointing out that if she were genuinely sorry, she wouldn't proceed with the affair. I made it clear that she was betraying her role as a faithful wife by being involved with another man. Despite my straightforward approach, she insisted that she had to do it because he needed her. Stressing the importance of family, I reminded Susan that our family needed her presence. I questioned her commitment to me and our children, emphasizing that our 3 kids were the product of our love for each other. I pleaded with her to remember our shared history and the family we had built together. However, she reiterated her commitment to the other man, assuring me that she would be fully present for me and the kids tomorrow. Despite my reservations, I reluctantly agreed, expressing my disapproval with a shake of my head and a sigh of defeat. Her face initially displayed triumph, but it quickly transformed into a condescending smile. She assured me not to worry, expressing her love and stating that she would always be mine. I acknowledged her words, mentioning that it would take a long time for me to be okay with her decision. Shaking my head once again, I watched as she walked towards the garage, acknowledging to myself that she was correct. It was just a temporary situation. Temporary until Loverboy has been dealt with. Then let her see how much she likes him when I'm done. As soon as she left, I went and grabbed the aluminum baseball bat, my old Bowie knife, and my blowtorch. I grinned evilly as I climbed into the cab of my Ford and turned on the GPS and VAR receivers. She had the radio on, and I could hear her humming a happy tune along with the radio. I slipped the torch, knife, and bat into the gym bag as I gave her a 5-minute head start. I saw by the GPS that she was only a few miles away, so I gunned my truck to life and headed over there. I pulled up to the house where she had just parked her car in his garage. Crap, she even had a garage door opener for his place. Jesus, she might as well be married to him instead of me. I felt my rage rising again, but took some deep breaths to keep it in check. I wanted to do nothing more than to bust him there and smack the crap out of him and her too if she got in the way. At least I got his license plate number and jotted it down quickly. I always carry a pen and a small notebook with me as an old habit from my time in Army CID. I also jotted down his address. No, this would take some proper planning. I made sure that my gear was squared away. I got in the back of the cab and changed into my redneck ninja gear. As I came to think of it, I put on the girdle so my gut wasn't showing, pulled on the gloves to get rid of any fingerprints, and the sweater over that. I put on the black jeans and pulled the ski mask on over my face. This would just be recon tonight. Tomorrow would be a different matter, however. I then pulled around to the mouth of the alleyway behind the houses. I stopped a few houses down from Loverboy's and slipped out quietly. I left the bat inside the cab and went in silently through his alley gate. No problems so far. I kept my eyes open, scanning for any alarm systems. None so far. I went low and Rhodey ran to the closest window. There was light from inside, and it was damn near pitch black outside. That would give me an advantage too. I stopped just below the window and peeked over the sill. What I saw made my blood boil. The guy was sitting there stroking himself while my wife gave him a little striptease. I was now damn glad that I hadn't brought the bat with me, as I would have busted in the window and then busted his head open with my impression of Mark McGuire. Taking several deep breaths to calm myself, I listened intently for any clues regarding the identity of the person she was interacting with. The voice on the other end spoke provocatively, expressing appreciation for Susan's dance and using suggestive language. Despite the urge to confront the situation immediately, I resisted and focused on maintaining self-control. There was a temptation to retrieve my bag from the truck, but I decided against it. The voice continued, praising Susan and expressing enthusiasm without any apparent guilt or hesitation. Knowing she was being deceptive, Susan giggled and mentioned someone named Jim. In response, the other person warned Jim that he would soon regret knowing Susan Fremont. Realizing that I had heard enough, I chose to leave before acting impulsively. I didn't want Susan present when I confronted the person on the other end of the conversation. While I had no intention of physically damaging Susan, her boy toy seemed to be a different matter, and I considered him fair game for a confrontation. So, he had set out to seduce my wife, knowing she was married. He had willfully and knowingly cucked me. He had somehow subverted Susan's iron will. He was dangerous, and I was going to make damn sure he never did it to anyone else's wife. Once I was back in the cab, I got out of the sweater, black jeans, and ski mask with Oakley's in the surprisingly comfortable sports girdle. It made my beer gut disappear when I put on my normal blue jeans, t-shirt, and boots. I started my truck and hauled out of there. Jim? Okay. Now I had a first name and I could look up his last name. In the morning. I walked into my house and decided to get my lockpicks from my nightstand. I had kept them since my time in CID, and somehow I knew they would come in handy someday. I called my mom and asked if she would like for the kids to stay overnight, and she said sure. She missed her grandkids, so I promised to bring them by in the morning for her to watch. I then called Susan's folks to let them know that I would pick up the kids later in the morning, and while they loved their grandchildren, they were relieved that I would be picking them up and taking them to my mom's place. I packed a suitcase with some of my clothes and boxers and shoved it in my closet. It was getting close to the end game now. She was going to realize just how much she had lost within the next 72 hours. I got to bed early and awoke early the next morning. after another morning jog and an actually healthy breakfast. Today, I got on my old laptop and looked up Jim's address and license plate number. Mr. James Robert Stevens was his name. He was indeed a divorce attorney, and he also really had lost his wife in an accident several years back, so they weren't lying about that. He had, however, used it to seduce my wife. The dirtbag was using his personal tragedy to steal another man's wife, my wife. Typical a hole. The news of his loss actually made me feel even better for what I had planned for his holiness. He was going to know true pain. Not the pain of loss that he had suffered before, but the pain that comes with the consequences of stealing another man's wife. I went to work as usual, still on my sabbatical, and parked in the parking lot. I then jogged to the bank and picked up my new ATM card and credit cards. Once those were in hand, I pulled $300 out of the ATM and rented a car from the Hertz rental place down the street from the bank. The car I rented was a nondescript sedan, and with my gym bag transferred from the truck to the car, I parked down the street from Loverboy's house. I used my cell to call Susan, and surprisingly, she picked up after the first ring. I mentioned being on a short break at work and inquired about how long she intended to let the kids stay at her parents' house until Monday. She asked why, and I suggested that my mom could watch them for a while, as they were her grandkids too, and she missed them. I delivered the statement in a reasonable tone, concealing my growing resentment. Susan agreed nonchalantly, and I lied again, saying that my mom would pick them up shortly. In a hopeful tone, I asked if I could expect some affection at home when I finished work. There was a long silence before Susan muted her microphone and reluctantly agreed, stating that it was only fair, as she had promised to be all mine that night. Her quick compliance surprised and worried me. I continued the charade, claiming that I was leaning toward her perspective but emphasizing my desire for equal time with her. Susan expressed happiness, believing I was thinking clearly. I played along, insisting that we needed to talk when she got home, but proposing a special weekend plan. She happily agreed, unaware of my true intentions. As the conversation took a lighter turn, I instructed her to be showered and prepared for my arrival, mentioning my early departure from work. Despite the convincing tone, I felt a sense of disgust at my own performance. However, recent days of jogging, healthy eating, and abstinence from drinks had improved my stamina, making me more confident about the evening. I joked about going down on her, and she laughed, assuring me that she always showered and douched after being with the other man, a claim I knew was likely untrue. She assured me that she would be showered and ready for me, expressing her intention to see me tonight. After ending the call, I placed my cell phone back in my pocket. I swiftly changed in the back seat of the sedan, becoming the redneck ninja once again, although without my ski mask and shades. I slumped down in the car and waited, parked in the opposite direction, anticipating Susan's return home. Despite her lack of awareness, I couldn't afford to be careless. Susan might not be foolish in that regard, but she was certainly mistaken if she thought I would simply accept her deceit. Starting the car, I pulled into the driveway of an abandoned house a few doors down and across the street from Jim's place. Adjusting the mirror to keep an eye on his driveway and garage, I settled back into the seat, ready to wait for hours if necessary. Susan surprised me when she left after only a few hours. She texted me and said she was leaving now and would be home clean and fresh and waiting for me. I smiled grimly, then backed out of the driveway and followed her at a safe distance. I wanted to make damn sure she wasn't lying to me. Sure enough, she pulled into our driveway 10 minutes later, and I just drove on by and back to his place. I parked in the alley behind the houses again and slipped in through his back gate as I had done the previous night. Only this time I had my bat on me and it was going to get a workout. I made sure my ski mask and shades were on and decided that it was indeed time. I looked in his bedroom window, and the lover boy was asleep. I smiled grimly, then tried the back door. It was unlocked, so I didn't even need to pick the lock. What an arrogant a-hole. Fine by me. Now, some of my preferred movies include the Dark Knight trilogy, featuring Christian Bale, Michael Caine, and a bunch of other talented actors. One aspect I particularly enjoyed was how Bale altered his voice as Batman. I had the full redneck ninja persona going on, and upon entering his bedroom, he was still fast asleep, likely from a night spent with my wife. Well, that was about to change. Dropping the gym bag, I retrieved the bat, cleared my throat loudly, and he groggily opened his eyes. Spotting the bat, panic set in. I aimed for his knee, shattering his kneecap, severely limiting his mobility. He screamed, and I struck again, breaking his other kneecap, rendering him immobile. Smirking beneath my mask, I lowered my voice to a growl. I confronted the man, taunting him about his involvement with Susan, and revealing that Jonathan was a friend who had warned me not to damage him. Expressing my own sense of justice, I swung at his groin, hearing bones crack as his pelvis broke. He pleaded for his life, offering money and crying in pain. Dismissing his pleas, I growled that I didn't want his money, but demanded that he never think about Susan Fremont again. I warned of dire consequences if he failed to comply, emphasizing that the encounter was merely a warning. I made it clear that reporting the incident to the police and causing consequences for Jonathan would result in my return, with more severe consequences. I punctuated this with another swift swing to his groin. From what I observed the night before, he wasn't as well endowed as I was. He was in shape, though, a shape I would soon be in, but by then, he wouldn't be able to compete. I swung the bat again, breaking his left arm just below the shoulder. I found his cell phone and smashed it along with both of his landline telephones. I didn't want him calling Susan or anyone else. Exiting through the back, I slipped out the gate and into the sedan. Changing again, I drove to a convenience store across town where I disposed of the bat. After filling the gas tank in the sedan's trunk, I drove out of town and set the remaining gym bag on fire. Once done, I wiped my fingerprints from the torch and tossed it into the flames. Burning the Oakley shades was regrettable, given their cost, but it was a necessary sacrifice. Next, I consulted a divorce attorney and had papers drawn up against Susan. I sought full custody of the kids and 75% of our assets. Alimony would not be paid, and I wouldn't request child support if she cooperated. I decided not to disclose the real reason for our divorce to her family. I informed my attorney that evidence of her affair would be recorded soon. Returning the rental car, I thanked the provider, then jogged back to the diesel shop. I informed my boss that I could finish the remaining shift, but needed to leave early for a meeting with Susan. A few days off were still required, and he approved. After completing my work in the shop, I bought a prepaid cell phone on the way home. Activating it, I called emergency in my altered voice, reporting the incident involving Mr. James Robert Stevens and providing his address. I discarded the phone into a nearby canal. My intent wasn't to cut down him, but to make him feel the pain I endured. For the rest of his life, every time he had lovemaking with my wife, he'd remember the misery he caused, and that to me was a fair trade. I extracted the voice recorder from my pocket and activated it. It's essential to note that I don't endorse or accept my wife's affair, neither now nor in the future. After deactivating the recorder, I stowed it back in my pocket. Upon pulling into the garage, I retrieved the GPS and voice-activated recorders from Susan's car before heading inside. Tossing them in my truck, I left it at that. Upon reactivating my pocket recorder, I approached Susan from behind, encircling her waist with my arms. I commented on the enticing aroma of the food Susan was cooking, planting a kiss on the side of her neck. She was preparing steaks on the stove and had already made mashed potatoes and green beans. Susan expressed relief that I seemed more understanding, cooing as she turned for a kiss. Shifting the conversation, I casually inquired if she would have genuinely divorced me if I hadn't complied with her demands. I maintained a light tone, as though her threats didn't bother me. She admitted that she would have divorced me without hesitation if I had denied her the relationship with her lover. Expressing regret, she insisted that she loved me. I further questioned her, asking if she would have taken my kids and denied me access, suggesting that such actions seemed harsh. Again, I kept my tone light, as if now accepting her demands. Susan acknowledged that she would have taken such measures, revealing that her lover had advised her to make the divorce as painful as possible. Expressing remorse, she mentioned having me for the weekend, with her mother caring for the kids until Monday. She proposed taking Monday off for our time together, but revealed plans to meet her lover again on Tuesday night until Wednesday morning, promising to be back to take care of our children. I sarcastically remarked on her being a great mother. In a defeated tone, I asked if there was nothing I could do to make her stop seeing him. She sighed condescendingly, apologizing and stating that she had to see the situation through. Despite the implications for her fitness as a mother, I acknowledged tonight as mine, planning to serve her with divorce papers on Monday. My lawyer assured me that the papers would be ready, and I intended to make the call on Monday morning. Dinner was fantastic, and I'd miss her cooking. Afterward, I showered and took her in my arms. I made love to her that night, passionately and vigorously, something we hadn't done in a long time. She climaxed repeatedly, thanks to my improved stamina and sobriety. I satisfied her thoroughly. But it didn't end there. I marked her. Leaving several hickeys on her chest, neck, stomach, and inner thighs, I was reclaiming her, and she reveled in every moment of it. After finishing, Susan discovered the marks when she went to the bathroom. Shocked and screaming, she returned to the bedroom, expressing concern about how she could face her lover now. I casually shrugged off her distress, asserting that as my wife, I wanted her marked as mine, regardless of his preferences. I reminded her that she never explicitly told me not to mark her, and pointed out that she seemed to enjoy it during the act. My response silenced her, and she softened, sitting on the bed and taking my hand. She expressed that the encounter was the best they've ever had, even better than with her lover. I sensed the authenticity of her pleasure, realizing that my efforts to make the experience enjoyable for her had paid off. In a plea for her to stop seeing her lover, I conveyed my love and desire to spend the rest of my life with her. Despite concealing my emotions well, the truth was that the encounter had been fueled by anger and hatred instead of tenderness and love. Regardless, I played my part convincingly. Susan assured me that she was still my wife, expressing love and claiming that the affair would run its course in a few more months. She seemed genuinely happy and prepared for the possibility of divorce, but I planned to blindside her. The next day she reverted to her old self, cooking, cleaning, and initiating lovemaking. That night, I informed her of taking Saturday and Monday off to spend more time together, enjoying our time while keeping a guard against her facade. Renewing the marks I made on her Friday night, she didn't protest afterward. It wasn't until Monday that everything unraveled. I pleaded with her one last time not to go back to him. Instead, she grabbed her cell phone and headed to the living room. I informed her that I was picking up the kids, and she agreed. I collected my boy and 2 girls from Mom's house, and she thanked me for letting them stay with her. On the way home, we stopped at Burger King, and I treated them to lunch. They loved it. Sure, it's not McDonald's, but oh well, the food tastes a lot better than Mickey D's. As we were leaving, Susan's ringtone echoed from my cell phone. I playfully chuckled into the phone, asking if she missed me already. I explained that I had taken the kids to Burger King for lunch, and we were on our way home. Susan screamed, demanding an explanation. I casually mentioned that she had been served with divorce papers while I was picking up the kids, adding that she must have received the papers. Apologizing and suggesting we talk about it at home, I ended the call before she could retort and turned off my phone. Pulling into the garage, I took the kids inside. Despite the divorce papers, Susan was genuinely happy to see them, and they eagerly ran to her, asking where she had been. She made up a usual lie about volunteering, and then truthfully explained that we had a special mommy and daddy-only weekend planned. Instructing the kids to play in their rooms, I told Susan that we needed to talk and took her into the basement. Ensuring the kids wouldn't hear us, I informed Susan that I had decided to divorce her, expressing my inability to endure the situation any longer. I reminded her of my repeated requests to end the affair and revealed that I had her own admission of the affair on tape. I declared my intention to send the tape to my attorney, who would submit it as evidence in the divorce proceedings. The divorce papers indicated my pursuit of full custody, highlighting her neglect of the family and her admission that her lover was more important than the children would be presented at the trial. I hinted that her lover acting as her attorney could lead to his disbarment, as it was considered a severe breach of ethics for a lawyer to be involved romantically with their clients, especially in divorce cases, according to my own attorney's advice. She stood there in shock, her mouth hanging open as she wrestled with finding words. I explained that I now realized I never truly knew her, just as she never knew me. Over the years, I had done everything to make her happy, buying the house, her car, and much of her jewelry. Despite spending more than we could afford, I compensated with overtime to improve her life and that of our kids. I expressed regret for not balancing it with the affection and love she deserved. I admitted genuinely loving her, but her affair had terminated that love. Contrary to her belief, I clarified that I never said I was okay with it. I revealed that I had given her one final chance that morning to end the affair completely, begging her to do so. If she had complied, I wouldn't have served her with divorce papers. Instead, she called her lover before I picked up the kids. Apologizing for the situation, I shook my head ruefully, though I was lying through my teeth. I didn't want her to know that I had been plotting this all along. In the divorce decree, I offered her generous visitation with the kids, either under my supervision or Mom's or Grandpa's. The next part would be difficult, but I had to inform Mom and Grandpa of the impending divorce. I called Mom first, explaining the entire situation, and that I had recorded Susan's admission of the affair. Mom agreed to babysit while I worked each day. I gathered the children, explained that Mommy and I wouldn't live together, but would always be there for them. They were happy about moving in with Grandma. Mom had rooms since Dad died, and we'd stay there. We packed up quickly, and I informed Susan that she was welcome at my mom's house with us if she didn't bring her boyfriend. She appeared utterly defeated. 2 days later, she discovered that Jim was in the hospital. When she called, I was back at work, asking her what was up. Susan, enraged, accused me of nearly assassination him, to which I responded with confusion and denial, playing my part convincingly. She insisted that I knew who she was talking about and claimed that Jim was never going to be the same again. She was crying as she accused me of trying to cut down him. I maintained my confusion, asking her who Jim was and expressing incredulity at her statements. I brought up a colleague and drinking buddy named Jim Barnes, who was present and overheard my side of the conversation. Jim Barnes was aware of the situation, and he tried not to laugh. Susan realized she couldn't prove my involvement and that I wasn't going to admit it. I calmly asked if some guy named Jim was her boyfriend, stating that if he was almost dead, it couldn't be Jim Barnes, who was likely to be terminated by a heart attack. I grinned at Jim Barnes, who couldn't contain his laughter, and ran into the office. Susan admitted that Jim had claimed he was attacked, but didn't know who did it. She mentioned that he had his balls crushed. I expressed my lack of sympathy if he was the man who stole her from me. I disassociated myself from the incident, but jokingly added that I'd buy a beer for whoever did it. Seizing the opportunity, I planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that he might seduce someone else's wife. I reminded her that she couldn't be with him all the time. Susan began to doubt his intentions, and I smiled, asking why she thought he wouldn't do such a thing. I pointed out that she had mentioned he used his wife's pass away to seduce her. Susan stopped and contemplated, eventually realizing that I was right. In a surprising turn of events, she admitted that I was right, breaking her pattern of never acknowledging my correctness. "Susan, mark this day on the calendar for me, the day you actually admitted that I was right about something," I laughed. Yeah, she didn't like that. Despite her disapproval, she didn't contest the divorce. Mom testified to providing babysitting for my children while I worked, and the judge took everything into account, including the pattern of behavior over the past year that Susan had been having the affair with Jim Stevens. While she had left the kids with responsible adults, she had done so to carry on her affair in secret. The judge didn't quite declare her unfit, but put me as the primary custodian. He declared Susan as secondary, but only on the stipulation that she not bring her lovers around the children. I wasn't thrilled with that, but I was satisfied. Hell, before she took up with Jim, Susan was a great mother. Now she would have a chance to be a great mother again. Then the judge told me that I would only have to pay child support, and only for the time they spent with Susan. Susan was ordered to get a job in college. She had majored in accounting, so she could get a job easily. The house was sold, and we split it 50-50ths. Our joint accounts, which I had absconded with at the beginning, however, were split 75, 25 in my favor. Yes, Susan attempted to complain, but the judge sternly reminded her that she had nearly lost all custody of her children due to her own selfishness and instructed her to get a job. Interestingly, the same judge presided over my alienation of affection lawsuit against James Robert Stevens. He actually took it seriously, and based on Susan's confession and testimony, surprisingly on my behalf, I was awarded $500,000 in the settlement. Yeah, I liked that judge. When the final gavel clacked, Marking our official divorce, and me $500,000 richer thanks to her efforts, I took Angie, my attorney, out for drinks at the Silver Spa. I had continued to exercise and eat right, and had cut out almost all drinks. But on this night, I wanted to at least have a beer or two. My pony keg beer go was back down to 6-pack apps. Yeah, I'd gotten back in shape during the whole mess. I knew I would have to be there for my kids, and I would be back on the market. I just hoped and prayed to find someone who wasn't as shallow and selfish as Susan. Angela Johnson is a gorgeous woman. Her dark chocolate skin looked delicious. It had been almost 7 months since I'd last had lovemaking with Susan, just before I blindsided her with the divorce papers. During that time, Angie and I had grown pretty close. We were more than just attorney-client. We'd become friends. As friends, we went to the bar for a couple of beers. Angie asked about my plans, and I shared that I intended to return to work and focus on raising my kids. I mentioned finding a smaller house with 1 story and 4 bedrooms, which was more affordable than the large one Susan had made me buy 3 years ago. We clinked bottles as I explained that I had moved in a couple of weeks ago, closed on the house, and the new location was closer to work, which the kids loved. Angie then asked about her own situation, acknowledging that she took on my case despite the potential losses. I thanked her for that, and she revealed that she had been divorced for about 4 years since her ex was caught cheating on her. I expressed surprise, and she explained that she doesn't like cheaters, which resonated with me. We shared a laugh and clinked bottles again. As our professional relationship concluded, Angie surprised me by asking if she could fire me as a client. Puzzled, I inquired about the reason, and she humorously mentioned that she doesn't date clients. I agreed, and she fired me with a smile, suggesting that we go to her place so she could cook for me. Fast forward 6 months, Angie and I have been dating, and it has been a joyful period. As a high-powered divorce attorney, Angie is not high maintenance, especially compared to Susan. She loves me and my kids, and we find it adorable that the children call her mommy too. Angie has moved in with us, and Susan joins us for dinner some nights when she takes the kids for the weekend. Angie and I share a fulfilling life together, enjoying each other's company and the pleasures of a great relationship. As for the idiot, he never recovered from what I did to him. Left penniless and alone after all his wife's insurance money went to paying his medical bills, court fees, and my alienation of affection lawsuit. Good. To hell with him. Susan seems to be doing much better now since her hormones were really out of whack. At least according to her doctor. She's been taking supplements and seems to be on much more of an even keel now. She has a steady job at an accounting firm in our town and is making some decent money. I've been promoted to supervisor of the diesel shop and make as much now for 40 hours as I used to for 60. I now have plenty of time to spend with my kids and with a new woman in my life. Susan will have to live with the crap she's done, and that's good enough for me. She blames herself for everything now, and I'm not even going to try to console her. She doesn't even date since she says she's still in love with me. Bull crap. But whatever. She'll have those regrets for the rest of her life, and part of me hopes she chokes on them. Am I still a little bitter? Yeah, I have to admit that I am. Luckily, Angie is here to help take my mind off the crap my ex put me through. Yeah, life is pretty damn good now.
Story 3.
One day after my dad passed away, my mom gave me up for adoption without warning. And now, after 10 years of silence, she's reached out to me asking for help. So, I, 17 female, was recently contacted by my mother after 10 years of no contact. She put me up for adoption when I was 7 years old, and thankfully, I was able to find a family willing to take me in. For the sake of clarity, while I'm narrating what happened, I'm going to be referring to my biological mother as Rebecca, and my adoptive parents as mom and dad. Rebecca had me with my biological father when she was probably around 20 years old, and she had to drop out of college because of me, but my biological father completed his education. And they got married right after he graduated. When I was around 3 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and he passed away shortly after I turned 7. But I guess the process for giving up my custody had already started long before my biological father passed away because my mother gave me away. And I moved in with my new family literally just one day after my dad passed away. I remember it as clearly as yesterday, even today, in spite of the fact that 10 years have passed since then, just because I was so upset and confused about what was going on. I remember being told by several people that I would be just fine, that my father was in a better place and stuff, but all I wanted to do was see how he was doing. He had been pretty sick, but he was always there whenever I wanted to see him. But I wasn't allowed to even say goodbye to him after he passed away. I barely even had time to register and process these things when my new family showed up the day after my dad's demise, and my mom told me that these people were going to take care of me for a couple of days. But days turned into weeks, and then into months, and eventually years, and I kept waiting for my mother to reach out to me. I remember crying a lot about this initially because I thought that my mother and my family had abandoned me. But a few weeks after Mom and Dad took me in, my biological grandparents came to see me, and they have been in touch with me since then. Back then, I was too young to be told the truth, but when I was around 14, they could not evade my questions anymore. I just really wanted to know what had happened with my birth mother, because I was well aware of the fact that I was adopted. I just wanted to know why all of this had happened, since I distinctly remember getting along well with my birth parents when I was little. So, I don't know why my mother suddenly gave up custody of me and put me up for adoption. Anyway, I found out the truth from my grandparents and my mom and dad eventually. So, apparently, after my biological father's diagnosis with leukemia, my mother was devastated. But instead of being there for him, she started an affair with my uncle. That was horrifying in itself, but nobody even knew about it until 6 months before my dad's demise, since his health had started worsening considerably at that point in time. And my uncle and Rebecca did not think there was any point in hiding their affair anymore because she knew that she wanted to be with him. And as soon as my father was out of the picture, she was getting together with him. So Rebecca and my uncle told their parents about it, and my grandparents were obviously disgusted with what was going on. But for my sick dad's sake, they kept their mouths shut about it because I was too young to understand, and they did not want my father finding out about any of this because he was already going through a lot as it is. And around the same time that they came clean about the affair to my grandparents, my uncle and Rebecca also announced that they were not willing to raise me and were considering putting me up for adoption. There was a lot of hue and cry about it, but Rebecca was pretty firm about what she wanted. Apparently, she said that she had been much too young when she had me and she didn't even want to be a mother. She did not feel ready at the time, and it was only because of her parents' insistence that she had me and got married to my father. Had her parents not pressured her, she probably wouldn't have done either of those things, and her life would have been very different. So, now that my father was going to be out of the picture, she did not want me either, and she was going to put me up for adoption. Now, it was obvious that they could not send me away as long as my father was alive, so they waited until he passed away. And after that, they allowed my mom and dad to finally take me in. Even my adoptive parents were very shocked by the kind of situation that I was in, but they really just wanted to adopt a child and complete their family since they had been struggling to conceive for a second time after the first pregnancy, and it was too risky for my mom anyway. I know that my parents probably wanted to adopt a much younger kid, but they told me that they hadn't heard about me from any adoption agency. It was actually one of my mom's cousins who told her about my situation since she used to be friends with Rebecca back then. And as soon as they heard about me, they knew that they had to get me out. They didn't even care about my age and spoke to my mother in person without any agencies involved. My mother also agreed to let them adopt me because even she was struggling to find someone who was willing to adopt a 7-year-old kid through the agency. They spoke to Rebecca 4 months before my dad passed away, and a couple of weeks before his death, everything had been finalized. And even my mom and dad had believed that after my father passed away, I would probably be staying with Rebecca for a couple of days at least, but she sent me away literally the next day. After I found out about the truth of the situation, I was really glad that Rebecca had decided to put me up for adoption. And I had been lucky enough to find such wonderful parents. Because people mostly go for younger kids when they are adopting, I found a really wonderful family. I love my mom and dad and my older brother, and I couldn't be happier. I also have literally 4 sets of grandparents, so you can imagine how spoiled I've been right from my childhood. Nobody kept in touch with my uncle or Rebecca after my dad passed away, and they were not even there for his funeral, which had been organized by my grandparents. I was there because it was a very somber situation, and I was already going through a very confusing phase, so they thought it would be better for me to settle into my new life until they reintroduced themselves. After finding out the truth about why I had been put up for adoption and why Rebecca did not remain a part of my life, I had thought that I would feel unwanted, or at least a little upset about it. But I mostly just felt relieved that I did not end up spending life with my biological mother, and I found my way to people who actually wanted me. I'm 17 now, I'm starting college in a couple of months, and I barely even think about Rebecca or my uncle or what they have been up to. But for the past couple of days, I haven't been able to stop thinking about them because she reached out to me on Instagram to ask me if I would be willing to meet with her and mend things. I have a public account, and it's obviously not difficult to find me, but I couldn't understand why she was reaching out to me after so many years. So, before I agreed to anything, I decided to ask her why she wanted to mend things with me all of a sudden. Then she sent me a long and heartfelt message about how so much time had passed, but even now she regretted her decision to give me up and prioritize her life with my uncle instead of her commitment as a mother. She said that she knew it was not her place to demand that I come back to her as her daughter, but she at least wanted me to know that she was not all wrong here. And the only mistake that she had made was that she had committed to a lot of things when she was too young to understand the repercussions of it. There was a lot of pressure on her, and that's why she had made a lot of bad decisions. But she never regretted having me, regardless of what my family might have told me. She was just not ready to be a mother, and she wanted to make things right with me. And after thinking about it, I decided to say yes because I was just curious. I did not tell my parents or my grandparents about it. I just went ahead and met her. Only after I met her did I realize that she was not asking me to meet her only because she wanted to make things right with me. She needed my help. I should have realized that earlier, but unfortunately, I have a tendency to try and see the good in everyone, even someone like Rebecca. Anyway, we met for lunch 2 days ago, and initially she seemed very warm and cordial with me. She tried to explain her side of the story, telling me that her parents insisted that she had to marry my father, drop out of college and take care of me and stuff like that, and she just wasn't ready for any of it. But she had to do it because her parents insisted on it. She later on started feeling very suffocated in her marriage, and the news of her husband's diagnosis was the last straw for her, which is why she was driven to have an affair. She did not regret it because she believed that my uncle was the love of her life, and she was glad to find him because she has been happily married to him for the past 8 years. While talking about my uncle, she started crying and told me that right now her marriage was in trouble, and that was part of the reason why she had come to me. She said that she needed my help in reconciling with her parents. And not just them, but also my father's parents, because after she gave me away for adoption without even telling them, they had cut her off for the last 10 years and had nothing to do with my uncle or her. Both of them had been fine with it in the past, but for some reason, my uncle had recently started fighting with Rebecca a lot because he wanted to reconcile with his parents. And he knew for a fact that they would never accept him back in their lives after everything that had happened. And for some reason, he was blaming Rebecca for it because he believed that if she hadn't been so hasty in giving me up to my adoptive parents and had waited for a bit, then things wouldn't have gone so sour between all of them. So now, the only solution that she could think of was to get me to talk to my grandparents and convince them to reconcile with my uncle and her. And maybe then she could save her marriage from falling apart because she and my uncle had been fighting a lot over the past couple of weeks. And she couldn't think of any other way to deal with the situation apart from this. Honestly, there's nothing that I regret more in my life than having gone to meet that woman, because clearly she was not there to genuinely apologize to me, to offer an explanation to me, or even to make amends like she claimed. She was only there because her marriage was in trouble, and she thought that I could help her out. If I could, I don't think I would want to do that because she does not deserve my help after how selfish she has been. After hearing her out, I told her that her crocodile tears were not going to work on me, and I was about to leave, but she said that if I had been in her place, I would have understood her situation better. She said that she had been forced to become a mother when she wasn't even ready to do it mentally, and in spite of that, she had tried her best to be a good mother to me. If I couldn't even see that because I was so brainwashed by my family, then that just meant I was no different from the rest of them. That just really ticked me off because so far she had only been a mother to me for 6 or 7 years, and even then she had all the help in the world. And I was pretty confident that she had not been told to drop out of college by my grandparents. That was her personal choice. They had told me several times that my mother had chosen to give birth to me. They had not insisted on anything, but had only advised her to have me and then see where it goes. She was the one who misconstrued it as pressure from them. And if it came down to choosing whom to trust between those two people, I would obviously pick my grandparents. So, I told her that she could sell her baloney somewhere where people would be stupid enough to buy it, since I was not. I told her I did not believe a word of what she was saying, even though I'd been willing to give her a chance to be honest and make amends with me like she said she wanted to. But she had cheapened her apology by trying to get me to fix her relationship without even trying to do it herself first. I told her that I was not obliged to do anything for her since we did not have any relationship. She might have given birth to me, but it was my mom who had raised me, not her. Then I walked out of the restaurant and went back home. After that, and once I got back home, I realized that she had texted me, and it was a voice note of her crying. I could tell that she was still inside the restaurant because I could hear the background noise. And that's why I felt a bit guilty, because I'm pretty sure you have to be really devastated to start crying like that in a public space. Anyway, she was crying and saying that it was really horrible of me to say that we did not have any relation because no matter what had happened, she was still my biological mother, and I was her flesh and blood. And regardless of everything, she still considered me her daughter, but I don't know what to tell her. I really just don't consider her my mother anymore. And I don't really want to feel bad about it because I don't think it's necessary. She hasn't been my mother for the past 10 years. I just feel messy and conflicted because of the way she was crying on the phone, and even now, I haven't been able to bring myself to block her. I don't think of her as my mother, but she's still a human being who had a connection with me. So, IATA for telling my biological mother that I don't consider her my mom anymore? Edit hi. So I thought it was very clear in my post that I haven't told my family about it. I don't think they would be on board with my decision to go meet Rebecca. And that's why I did not tell them before I made my decision. I know I owe this to them, and I'm definitely going to tell them, but for now, I just wanted this to be something that I made a call on by myself. Besides, I knew that if I had told them about it, they never would have let me meet her because all of them hated her, and rightfully so. I know that for a fact. I guess I just wanted some closure, and that's why I went to meet her in the first place. I didn't know what I was expecting. I knew that she was going to apologize, and I just wanted to talk to her one last time. I guess it's just that her reaching out to me brought up a lot of mixed emotions, and I guess I wasn't thinking straight. But whatever it is, I did go to meet her, and it's done now, and I don't think I would change my decision if I could go back in the past and do it. I needed some closure, and I got it, and I don't regret what I did. Sometimes you just have to forget about everybody else and do what you think is right, even if it's a mistake. It's going to be your mistake, and that's what I believe. Update 1. I finally told my family that I had gone to visit Rebecca, and just as I had expected, they were not happy about it in the slightest. I met her last week, and I blocked her a couple of days back after she kept relentlessly bombarding me with texts and phone calls demanding that I speak to her again and give her a chance to explain herself. I didn't know what she was going to say to me, but I didn't even want to find out anymore. I met her once and got my closure, but that's all that I needed from her. And it's not like she genuinely wanted to speak to me and make things right. She just needed my help, and I'm pretty sure that's the reason why she's even contacting me after the fight that we had at the restaurant. Anyway, I didn't want to speak to her again, and I knew that it was about time that I told my family about our meeting as well. So, I sat them all down, my parents and all my grandparents, and I explained everything to them. My parents were obviously upset that I hadn't discussed this with them and I had just taken off without telling them who I was meeting, but they still seemed to understand. It was my grandparents who were really upset with me. They scolded me a lot, and I heard them out patiently because I deserved it. I should have spoken to them first. Mostly, they were just worried that my mother would have tried to brainwash me and tried to make them look like the villains since they knew her well enough to expect it. After they were done, I told them that the only reason I had met was because I needed some closure, and I did not expect everyone to understand immediately why I had that thought process. But it was something that I needed to do, and I did it. The only thing that I was sorry about was that I did it behind their backs, but I promised them that I would never be dishonest with them ever again, and that seemed to pacify everyone. Then we started discussing the reason why Rebecca had called me there, and the things that she had said about my uncle wanting to reconcile with his parents and stuff. The one thing that all of us could agree on was the fact that there was definitely more to the situation than we were being led on. If she was trying to manipulate me into getting back into the family, it meant that they were probably in trouble and needed some sort of help. And since Rebecca had said that her marriage was in trouble, and she had definitely seemed very distressed when she was on the phone, and even when she met me, my grandparents deduced that she was probably being truthful about my uncle being pissed at her. Now, whatever the truth is, we're not going to interfere because it's not our place to say anything. My grandparents were very clear about it. They said that they had stopped considering my uncle and Rebecca their family the day that they announced that they were together while my father was still sick. The last of it was when my mother just gave me away without even talking to them or giving them time to explain things to me. They just got lucky that my adoptive parents were kind enough to continue to allow them to be a part of my life. So, long story short, I have now blocked Rebecca. No matter what happens after this, I'm not going to be speaking to her again. I know that she's quite desperate to talk to me since the last few messages that she sent me were begging me to talk to her and telling me that her marriage was falling apart, and so was her life. And she desperately needed me right now. I felt really guilty ignoring all of that, but honestly, what does she even expect me to do? Even if I wanted to, I really don't think that I would be able to get my grandparents to speak to her or my uncle. If I were in their place, I wouldn't want to speak to them either, so it's completely fair for me not to want to interact with her anymore. I know that she can just make more accounts and keep trying to get to me, but it's not going to work. So I have decided that if she tries to reach out to me again, then I'm going to tell her that I'm not interested, and if she bothers me, then I'm going to report her. I did overhear my grandparents discussing potential reasons as to why my uncle would want to contact them again after so many years, and they had been speculating that maybe they were having financial trouble. Since nobody from our family has been in touch with them, we don't really know what they've been doing. We know for a fact that they are still living here in the same city, but we don't know what they do for a living. Rebecca used to be a stay-at-home mom when I was living with her, but now, I don't know. But one thing is for sure. If my grandparents are right and Rebecca and my uncle are actually trying to reconcile with my grandparents because they are in financial trouble, I will know for a fact that they don't even deserve the bare minimum respect that they receive from other people, because it is just disgusting human behavior. Reaching out to your daughter who you haven't spoken to in a decade so she can fix the situation with your parents just because you need money. That's literally one of the cheapest things I can imagine people doing. And yeah, I really hope that she gets her comeuppance if that's actually the case here. Update 2. Hey, so she reached out to me once again today. I had blocked her everywhere about 10 days ago, and after a week passed without any sign of her reaching out to me again, I thought that she had given up. But somehow she was able to find out where I go to school, and I guess that's why we shouldn't put out our personal information on public platforms. It was a lesson learned the hard way. But anyway, when I started walking back home from school today, she showed up on my way out of absolutely nowhere, and I was pretty taken aback. It happened about a block away from school, and I don't live very far from my school, so I usually just walk home. But she showed up in her car and started yelling at me to get in. I told her I was not going to get into her car because I did not trust her, and I said that if she insisted or tried to create drama, then I would start screaming right there in the middle of the street, and then she would be done for. She just told me she was not here to fight with me or bother me, she just wanted to talk to me, and she did not even care if I was not going to help her reconcile with her parents. She just wanted to speak to me and reconcile with me, at the very least. She claimed that everything had gone wrong the last time that we met, and she just wanted to make up for everything. She knew that I was going to misconstrue everything that she was saying as fake, and think that she was putting up an act, but she wanted to tell me that that was not the case. That she really would love to make things right with me. I could literally hear how desperate she was in her voice, and I don't know why. I know I should have felt bad for her, but I just felt annoyed. So, I told her to leave me alone. I did not want anything to do with her. And that's when her true colors started showing again. I'm actually pretty proud of myself for not falling for her act the first time around, since she was pretty good at pretending that she was sorry and she really wanted to make things right with me. Anyway, as soon as I told her to leave me alone, I guess I had a bit of a talk, and she completely freaked out at me because of it. She started cursing at me and said that she was trying really hard to talk to me politely, but if I was going to be like this, then she was going to make sure that she screwed up my life. The woman literally started threatening me, saying I had better watch my back and stuff now, but I just found it very amusing because what was she even going to do? Anyway, I just continued to walk while she cursed at me, and eventually she just drove off after flipping me off, and I was so relieved. Once I got back home, I told my parents about it, and once again, everyone gathered around to discuss what was going to be done. Since she has threatened me, we have grounds for a restraining order, so we are guessing that we are probably going to go that way. And I don't have an issue with it. I would actually prefer that so that she cannot bother me again and again. Update 3. So, a couple of days ago, my parents filed for a restraining order against Rebecca. And after she was served, that's when my uncle decided to reach out to his parents finally. And just like they had predicted, it was obviously because of money. They had been running a confectionery together for the past couple of years, but it has not been doing well for the last few years, so they were in desperate need of money. But they knew that if they reached out to their parents directly, it would not work, and that's why they came up with this whole act. But unfortunately, Rebecca lost patience with me, and it screwed everything up for them. So, who knows? They might even get divorced because of this, and I'll be the happiest person if that happens. My uncle is still trying to suck up to his parents, trying to get them to give him some money, and he keeps saying that he has nothing to do with the way Rebecca behaved with me. But as their only son, he deserves to get some help from them. Rebecca, on the other hand, is taking a very strange approach and has decided to be as nasty as she possibly can to her parents and me, and has been talking crap about us online without any fear of the consequences. All that's doing is making our case stronger, so I hope she continues. We are pretty positive that we are going to be able to get the restraining order against her because it's pretty obvious that she is unhinged now. I don't even know why she's fighting it, because the other day she made it pretty clear that she wants nothing to do with me anyway. It doesn't matter in the first place because I'm going to be leaving for college in the fall, and I don't think it's going to be likely for her to show up there since she's struggling with money. And regardless of whatever happens, my parents and my family are always going to be by my side, so I don't really think that I have anything to worry about.
Story 4.
Life often unfolds in ways that defy prediction, shaped by the seemingly mundane choices we make every day. I've always believed that destiny is less about fate and more about the paths we choose, even when those paths lead us to the most unexpected corners of our existence. Growing up, I had a knack for curiosity, an insatiable urge to understand how things worked and why people acted the way they did. This tendency carried me through childhood adventures and later into a career that demanded both precision and a tolerance for ambiguity. Though I was always drawn to the tranquility of nature, life had other plans for me. I met Brenda, my vivacious and captivating wife, in a way that felt serendipitous. Our worlds were different, yet somehow complementary, hers filled with the dynamic energy of social engagement and mine rooted in a quieter, methodical rhythm. Over the years, we crafted a life of shared experiences, from hiking through rugged trails to navigating the complexities of suburban living. But as I'd learned, even the strongest bonds can fracture under pressure, especially when trust is put to the test. The heart of the Jornada del Muerto celebration is Trinity, a name that fittingly translates to Dead Man's Journey. Driving there means cruising a lonely two-lane road cutting through the White Sands Missile Range, surrounded by the endless hum of the New Mexico desert. One night, I found myself on that road. The sky was a dark canvas speckled with sharp stars, and the occasional meteor streaked across like a falling ember. It was just me, my reliable F-150, and the occasional armadillo. Add a scruffy dog named Buster, and it would have been a country song cliché. That memory came rushing back recently, triggered by a reflection on how life-changing small decisions can be. Turning left instead of right, crossing a street or not. Sometimes those tiny choices can seal your fate. Brenda, my wife of 14 years, was brilliant, witty, stunning, and full of life. We had built a comfortable middle-class existence in the northeast suburbs of Albuquerque. While she thrived as a public relations consultant for a global development firm, I worked as a botanist at Sandia National Laboratories, a job that was low-stress, high-paying, and suited my introverted, nerdy tendencies. Our differences made us perfect for each other. She was emotional and spirited, and I was the calm, logical counterpart. Brenda was the fire to my steady rhythm, pulling me out of my cerebral cocoon. We shared a love for the outdoors, spending our free time hiking, biking, and kayaking around Albuquerque, which felt like paradise for nature lovers. Still, every paradise has its troublemakers. Ours came in the form of Richard Hondo Tadwell, a boastful neighbor who fancied himself a hero. Hondo, a major in the military training wing at Kirtland, was a stocky 6-footer with a penchant for machismo. He thought his sheer size, half a foot taller and 70 pounds heavier than me, gave him the upper hand. But size isn't everything. I've always relied on wit to navigate bullies. When Hondo smugly called me Little Davy, I'd respond with a casual grin and quip, "Wrong guy, Little Johnson." The delayed realization of the jab always left him simmering while everyone else chuckled. Brenda and I had built a bond based on shared adventures, intellectual curiosity, and the ability to weather storms together. But as I'd soon learn, even the strongest relationships can face unexpected challenges, sometimes lurking right next door. The snake slithered into my garden, drawn by the chaos of neighborhood life. I'm not one for gossip or petty drama about distant acquaintances, but Brenda thrived on it. Her social circle revolved around lively parties that, to me, felt more like battlegrounds than gatherings. People drank too much, got too close, and occasionally bared their souls, or something else. I went to these events out of duty, not interest, and was quickly pegged as the supportive spouse who had no stake in golf scores or minor league baseball. The nights followed a pattern. Cheerful arrivals, rapid-fire small talk, and, after enough drinks, private slurred conversations. These exchanges often included inappropriate touches and melodramatic outbursts over trivial matters. Brenda loved it. She called it connecting with people, but it seemed more like feeding on juicy gossip. Through her, I learned plenty about the scandalous lives of our supposedly perfect neighbors. One night I spotted Brenda deep in conversation with Hondo Tadwell, our obnoxious neighbor. He was hunched over, looking distraught, while Brenda squeezed his hand with sympathy. It might have seemed genuine if his eyes hadn't been glued to her cleavage as he lamented his woes. Hondo, or Turd, as I secretly called him, was the worst kind of womanizer. He claimed his predatory behavior was an alpha male privilege. We all knew it was just him being a narcissistic jerk. He was generally easy to ignore unless he was targeting your wife. Then it became personal. Seething inside, but keeping my tone casual, I said, "Brenda, it's late, let's go." Her reaction was startling. She glared at me and snapped, "Can't you see we're talking about something important?" Turd, playing the martyr, chimed in, "Brenda's been a big help. You should go home to your husband." He gave her hand a dramatic pat and wandered off into the drunken crowd. On the drive home, Brenda defended him. Apparently, his wife Polly, a former beauty queen with all the depth of a puddle, had cheated on him, and he was devastated. I didn't buy it. Turd's history with women was legendary, and his heartbreak routine seemed like a ploy. But Brenda, ever the bleeding heart, insisted there was a sensitive soul behind his facade. "Sensitive?" I retorted. "How do you know? Been hanging out in his treehouse?" She blushed, admitting he'd stopped by to see me a few times when I wasn't home. The revelation hit me hard. "Did it ever occur to you that you might be his target?" Brenda looked genuinely confused. "Why would he? He says he needs your help with clearance issues." "Brenda," I said flatly, "you're the prettiest woman on the block. He's testing boundaries." Her face softened in that way women do when they appreciate a compliment, but don't like the jealousy behind it. "Well," she hesitated, "he stopped by 3 or 4 times a week lately. We talk while he waits for you, but he doesn't stay long. Says he doesn't want Polly to worry." I laughed bitterly. Since when does Tadwell care what his wife thinks? The realization seemed to sink in. Turd wasn't just a snake in the garden. He was sizing up the house. Brenda glared at me. "Hondo cares deeply about his marriage," she insisted. "He keeps saying how lucky we are and how much he wishes he had what we have. That's why I supported him when he told me about Polly's infidelity." I snapped back. "He wants what I have, and that's where it ends. Tell him to call me if he needs to talk. I don't want him alone with you again." Brenda's anger flared. "You don't get to dictate who I talk to. This isn't the dark ages." Sensing the conversation spiraling, I softened my tone. "Fine. If he shows up again, just call me. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I figured that would put an end to Hondo's visits. The tension between us lingered for weeks, affecting everything, including our intimacy, but love eventually thawed the ice. To rebuild some joy, we planned a trip to Santa Fe. The mountain air and vibrant art scene always lifted our spirits. We stayed at the Five Graces Hotel, with its adobe charm and ornate Spanish furnishings. It was a fitting backdrop as Brenda began to lighten up. Still, I couldn't shake the shadow Hondo had cast on our relationship. At dinner one evening, the sunset's golden red glow painted the sky, and Brenda's smile suggested better things ahead. That night, under Santa Fe's starry sky, the warmth between us returned. The next day, we visited the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, but even surrounded by stunning art, I couldn't fully relax. Watching Brenda, I reflected on what made her special. Not just her beauty, but her warmth and vivacious spirit. Still, her faith in others sometimes blinded her to manipulation. And Hondo wasn't just anyone. He was a predator who saw Brenda's kindness as a weakness to exploit. The situation left me cornered. If I confronted Hondo, I'd look like a paranoid fool. If I said nothing, he might go too far. Worse, Brenda dismissed my concerns as jealousy, deepening the divide. But trust is essential in marriage. Without it, everything crumbles. Despite my doubts, I wanted to believe in Brenda's integrity. Still, the evidence of Hondo's intentions was undeniable. His attempts to pull her into his orbit were as obvious as a gravitational pull. I decided to act. Using a simple man-in-the-middle tool from a darknet market, I prepared for the next neighborhood barbecue. When the day came, I discreetly accessed Hondo's phone, planting a program that gave me control of his communications. A seemingly innocent photo of a kitten he sent Brenda triggered a rootkit, granting me access to every text, call, and photo on both their devices. As I watched Brenda try to soothe Hondo, my emotions churned. "Brenda," I muttered under my breath, "I hardly know you." The paradox was unbearable. I craved the truth but dreaded what it might reveal. A good marriage is a refuge from life's hardships, but even that sanctuary can be shaken by doubt. Part of me wanted to dismiss my suspicions as paranoia, to preserve the life we'd built together. Yet, deep down, I couldn't ignore the evidence stacking up against us. In the end, I faced a painful reality. I needed answers, even if finding them risked destroying the very happiness I was trying to protect. Loyalty in a relationship means setting boundaries, particularly with intimacy. Sharing your deepest self with more than one person erodes trust and undermines the bond you've built. While humans aren't naturally monogamous, fidelity is a choice, one that reveals a person's true character. Those with integrity honor their promises. Those without don't. I'd always believed Brenda valued her self-respect too much to compromise it. So, when I overheard her conversation with Hondo Turd Tadwell on Monday morning, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. "Brenda," he said, voice dripping with need, "you're the only one who understands me. Without your love, I don't know how I'd go on." Brenda, her voice tight with frustration, replied, "I've told you, Richard. I don't love you. I love my husband. I'm just trying to help you move on without Polly." My stomach dropped. Turd continued, his tone pitiful. "I know that, but seeing you is the only thing keeping me afloat. I need your comfort." After a long pause, Brenda softened. "Fine, one last time, but you need to figure this out on your own. I won't let this ruin my marriage." What? Had she lost her mind? Their plans unfolded. Turd was going to be in Alamogordo on Business Wednesday and wanted her to meet him there. Brenda hesitated, but his pathetic pleas wore her down. Brenda's job involved flying small helicopters for real estate scouting in New Mexico, so the distance wasn't an obstacle. She agreed, despite her better judgment, to fly out and meet him. As the call ended, she said, "This is the last time," to which he replied, "Thank you," with mock sincerity. I sat there stunned. How could she fall for his manipulative nonsense? Turd had clearly been working on her for months, preying on her warm, sentimental nature. Brenda was kind-hearted to a fault, someone who cried during puppy commercials and believed people meant exactly what they said. But this, it was too much. My emotions churned, confusion, betrayal, and anger all at once. I blamed myself for underestimating Turd. I had dismissed him as a cartoonish womanizer, but I hadn't been there to counteract the hours he'd spent spinning lies at our kitchen table. Somehow he'd convinced Brenda that beneath his grotesque exterior lurked a sensitive, misunderstood man. I wanted revenge, but first I needed the full story. My instincts told me to stay calm and gather evidence. Brenda had no idea I was aware of her plans, so I prepared to confront the situation head-on in Alamogordo. Over the next 2 days, I stewed in my anger while playing the part of the loving husband. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, trying to reconcile my growing suspicions with Brenda's attempts to act as though everything was fine. By Wednesday, I was ready. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Turd's manipulations destroy my marriage without a fight. People often reshape contradictory truths into something they can live with, creating split versions of themselves. Tonight, I sat across from the loyal, devoted Brenda, her eyes filled with love and sincerity. But the other Brenda, the one who had crossed boundaries, existed in the shadows when I wasn't there. As we dined at La Crêpe Michel, our favorite spot for vegetarian dishes, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought. Was she deceiving even herself? Maybe the weight of guilt drives even decent people into a kind of madness. But unlike a crime of passion, infidelity has no defense. I could have confronted her, begged her to stay home, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Brenda had passed the point of no return. Reconciliation was no longer my goal. Retribution was. My focus shifted entirely to Hondo Turd Tadwell. He needed to pay, and I intended to make him. The plan was straightforward. First, gather incriminating photos and messages to expose his behavior to everyone in his orbit, his wife, his pastor, his colleagues, and his Air Force superiors. I would use his own phone to distribute the evidence, ensuring that no one suspected me. The beauty of it? Turd would know exactly who had destroyed him, while everyone else assumed he'd sabotaged himself. But I wasn't stopping there. Once his reputation was in ruins, I'd take it further, dump his personal details onto the dark web. By the end of the day, he'd be drowning in fraudulent mortgages, maxed out credit cards, and a visit from the FBI. Then I'd send him a note. "Don't thank me. It was my pleasure." On Wednesday, I drove to Alamogordo, arriving around 2 p.m. Brenda's yellow and white Denali H-3 helicopter was parked discreetly behind the Quality Inn, her preferred aircraft for work trips. She had made the journey herself, meeting Turd at the appointed spot. A quick hack of the hotel's system confirmed what I suspected. They were in room 217, booked under his name. The arrogance of it made my temper rise. I entered the lobby, dressed in a business suit, blending into the humdrum atmosphere of a roadside chain hotel catering to Holloman Air Force Base personnel. The clerk barely glanced at me as I settled into a chair and opened my iPad. From there, I activated an aardvark device, a compact, advanced surveillance tool I'd obtained through military connections. Originally designed for tactical missions in Afghanistan, it allowed me to see and hear everything happening in room 217 without ever leaving the lobby. While sipping a hazelnut coffee from the complimentary stand, I edited a 60-second video compilation of Turd's incriminating behavior using Filmmaker Pro. The footage would be concise enough to bypass spam filters, but damning enough to destroy his personal and professional life. Once I returned home, I planned to upload it to the dark web using the anonymity of a Tor browser. By the time I was done, Turd's betrayal would be common knowledge and his life would be in shambles. At exactly 3 o'clock, the elevator doors opened and Turd stepped out. He looked smug, completely unaware of my presence. His phone rang as he crossed the lobby. He answered casually, but within seconds his expression shifted from confidence to confusion and then to outright panic. Whoever was on the line, his wife, a colleague, or perhaps a superior, had evidently uncovered his deceit. After a brief argument, he hung up and bolted for the parking lot, speeding off in his car down White Sands Boulevard. As I savored the poetic justice of his downfall, the elevator buzzed again. This time, it was Brenda. She stepped out looking radiant but visibly troubled. Her movements were hesitant, her expression heavy with guilt. She was heading toward the back of the motel where her helicopter was parked, carrying the weight of her choices with every step, a literal walk of shame. Then she saw me. She froze mid-step, her eyes widening in shock. At first there was confusion, as if her brain couldn't process my presence. Then came the realization, a visceral wave of recognition that hit her like a physical blow. Her face drained of color and her knees buckled. It's called vasovagal syncope, a reaction to intense emotional stress. Most people just call it fainting. As Brenda crumpled to the ground, I stood there, unmoving, watching the consequences of her actions unfold. In that moment, everything changed. She wasn't just my wife anymore. She was someone I didn't fully know, someone capable of betrayal I hadn't believed possible. And yet, as much as I wanted justice, I couldn't deny the sting of heartbreak. At first, her eyes widened with shock. Then she fainted, her body going limp in my arms. I carried her to a couch in the lobby, doing my best not to attract attention. Luckily, the desk clerk was nowhere to be seen. I eased her down, keeping her supported until she stirred moments later. Her eyes fluttered open, and she realized she was leaning against me. Her sigh echoed in the empty lobby. I spoke gently. "There's nothing to explain. Let's just finish what needs to be done." Her face crumpled, and she whispered with despair, "Davy, this wasn't supposed to happen." I kept my tone steady. "What did you expect? You know what I do." Panic set in as she gripped my shoulders. "Please, let me explain. It's not what you think." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at the cliché. "It's exactly what it looks like, Brenda," I replied, tapping my tablet. "Want a visual reminder?" Tears welled up and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing, "You weren't supposed to find out." The lobby was still deserted, but I wasn't taking chances. I pointed to the ladies' room. "Go clean yourself up. We'll talk tonight at home. I have a lot to handle." She nodded, her misery palpable. "I love you, Davy, only you." I stood, looking her way. "I love you too, Brenda. That's why this is so hard. We'll talk later." I walked out calmly, but her muffled sobs followed me to the parking lot. My own legs felt unsteady, so I stopped at the first roadside bar I saw. A heavily tattooed waitress brought me a beer, which I downed quickly, trying to steady the nausea and chills. I had to get home before the shock overwhelmed me. Driving north, I reflected on the chaos I had unleashed on Tadwell. The terror on his face had been priceless, but his real reckoning was still ahead. The dark web would handle that. Ruining him for life was far more satisfying than getting myself locked up. But Brenda, her betrayal haunted me. The bond we shared was shattered. This wasn't just about my pride or trust. It was the end of everything unique between us. The specter of Richard Tadwell would always loom, a permanent wedge in our once exclusive connection. Some people go through life unscathed by betrayal, but most aren't so lucky. Weaknesses are exploited and collateral damage is inevitable. That was our reality now. Two broken people, each dragging the other down. As for me, I had to figure out what came next. Divorce seemed like the only option. I wasn't about to live as a loser or take a darker path. Brenda was a stranger to me now, her actions completely out of character for the woman I thought I knew. I had imagined a shared future, one that now felt like a cruel joke. There would be no growing old together, no simple joys, just a painful separation. By the time I reached the Mockingbird Mountains, night had fully fallen. Blake Shelton's "When Somebody Knows You That Well" played on the radio, its irony cutting deep. The barren Sonoran desert stretched before me, its emptiness matching the void in my chest. This wasteland had seen humanity's greatest turning point. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the nuclear age was born here with the Trinity test. Robert Oppenheimer may have named it after poetry, but physicist Ken Bainbridge summed it up best. Now we're all sons of witches. Splitting the atom redefined humanity. Those scientists didn't even know if their device would work, let alone what might happen. That's why they chose this desolate expanse, the Alamo-Gordo bombing range, to detonate it, hundreds of miles from civilization, with only lizards and snakes for neighbors. The only nearby structure was a shed where the bomb had been assembled. Driving through that bleak terrain, I couldn't help but feel the parallels. A devastating chain reaction had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. When the project was complete, they placed the device atop a 100-foot steel tower rising from the desert floor. Moments later, history witnessed the birth of the atomic age. The explosion fused the sand into a green, radioactive glass named trinitite. Oppenheimer, ever the poet, famously murmured, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I was nearing the access road to the Trinity site, the night sky casting a silvery glow over the barren landscape. Stars stretched endlessly above, and the moon bathed everything in a soft, ethereal light. My headlights caught a historical marker, and then something else. A figure stood at the intersection watching me. It was surreal. I hit the brakes, stunned. In the beam of my headlights stood a small, impossibly graceful woman. Her beauty was otherworldly, with pale alabaster skin, short black hair, and large green eyes. She was dressed head to toe in a sleek black suit adorned with strange insignias. On her arm was a device that looked like something a U-2 pilot might wear. Assuming she was part of some military test gone awry, I stepped out of the truck. She stood calmly, her posture oddly casual for someone who might have parachuted from 65,000 feet. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I asked cautiously. "Do you need a ride to get in touch with your people?" Her voice was melodic but firm. "No, thank you. I'm just getting my bearings. It's disorienting here." That was odd enough, but her next words were stranger. When I offered again to help her find a way back, she replied, "I came through a portal, of course." "Why?" "A portal, of course." I kept my tone neutral. "And where exactly is this portal?" She waved vaguely toward the northeast. "It's a long walk." Trying to process this bizarre claim, I asked, "So you came here through a portal? From where exactly?" She sighed in exasperation. "I had to leave. It wasn't safe there." Now I was standing in the middle of nowhere with a mysterious woman who claimed to have escaped some undefined danger through an interdimensional portal. Add to that my already fried nerves from recent personal turmoil, and you can imagine my growing headache. I decided not to leave her stranded. "It's not safe here either," I said calmly. "Why don't you get in the truck? I'll take you somewhere you can figure out your next step." She hesitated, clearly suspicious. "I'm not going to take you anywhere you don't want to go," I added. "But this area is called Death's Journey for a reason. It's full of predators, and you won't last long alone." As if on cue, a coyote howled in the distance. She flinched and finally asked, "You're not going to hurt me?" "Of course not," I said, doing my best to sound reassuring. Her suit was so form-fitting it left almost nothing to the imagination, and I could see why she'd be wary of strangers. "Look, I have my own problems. If you get in the truck, I'll tell you a story to pass the time." Reluctantly, she climbed into the passenger seat, keeping as far from me as possible. We drove in silence for a while before she asked, "What's the story?" I chuckled. "My life isn't interesting enough to entertain you. I just said that so you'd make a smart choice. People die out here." Her expression turned worried, her delicate features bathed in moonlight. "Where are your people? Where are you going? Who can I call for you?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then admitted, "I don't know anyone on this planet. This is just where the portal opened when I jumped through the event horizon." The statement was so surreal I almost laughed, but I kept my tone kind. "Why did you jump? What made you take the leap?" Her silence filled the truck as we continued through the desert. The strangeness of the night only deepened, and I began to wonder if this encounter would lead to answers, or only more questions. For the first time, she seemed to reflect on the events that brought her here. Her face twisted in horror. "It was terrible," she said. "The growling, it just wouldn't stop. It liquidated everyone. Escaping through the portal was my only choice." I tried to stay calm. "Growling? What are you talking about? Who or what are they?" "They're intergalactic predators," she said, her voice steady but grim. "They've turned my planet into their feeding ground. I only survived because I was on duty at the transporter center when they arrived." Her tone suggested everyone on her world knew about these predators. After a pause, she added almost soothingly, "Don't worry. I sealed the portal when I left. They can't follow me here." It was certainly more interesting than the country songs on the radio. "Let's say I believe you," I said. "Then why do you look human? And how are we even communicating?" Her reply came with a cheerful lilt. "Oh, is that what you call this language? English? I'm speaking directly to your mind. Some concepts, though, don't have equivalents in your world." "Telepathic powers, of course," she continued. "All intelligent life of our kind shares the same basic structure. It's the most efficient form. Naturally, we look alike." I couldn't help but laugh. "You have an answer for everything, don't you?" Her expression softened into concern. "Why are you so sad?" Her question caught me off guard. "What makes you think I'm sad?" "Your body language," she said with childlike curiosity. "Is it because your friend was just taken by another man?" I slammed on the brakes, staring at her in shock. "How could you possibly know that? Who are you?" She smiled as though trying to lighten the mood. "I'm Stella," she said, "and I'm from the Perseus arm of the galaxy. Your son's in the outer arm, so we're practically neighbors." Her light-hearted tone only deepened my disbelief. "If you're from an advanced alien race, why are you here in the middle of nowhere? Wouldn't your people pick a better landing spot?" She answered like a teacher explaining to a child. "The builders chose this place because the first atomic explosion signaled your planet's advancement. We study only civilizations that reach a certain level of development." "So the bomb was like a flare?" I asked, feeling like I was buying into her narrative. "Yes," she said, nodding. "There are billions of civilizations, but only advanced ones are worth observing. Remote locations are ideal for secret studies, though. We've been visiting your planet for over 70 years. One expedition even disappeared not far from here." Roswell, I thought. She was definitely delusional, but abandoning her in the desert felt wrong. Still, I had my own problems. I was heading home to confront my wife about her betrayal, and bringing Stella along would make an already volatile situation worse. "It's fine if I'm in the way," Stella said sympathetically, reading my hesitation. "I can manage on my own." I didn't stop driving. Her eerie ability to read me unsettled me, but she seemed genuine. "I can't just leave you out here," I said. "A woman like you wouldn't survive long in a place like Albuquerque." I added, almost bitterly, "You're right, though. I just found out my wife cheated on me, and I'm going home to negotiate our separation." She nodded thoughtfully. In many family-oriented cultures, fidelity is tied to ensuring the origin of offspring. On my planet, it doesn't matter. We're all raised by the central gnome. I assumed gnome was her term for some government system. She added, "Of course, couples can choose exclusive unions, but we implant a device during the ceremony. It eliminates them if they break the bond." I couldn't help but smile. "Sounds like a good deterrent. Maybe we should try that." She smiled too. "In my world, I've never felt the need to bind myself to one partner. It seems too confining, but sometimes I wonder what it's like to be so committed." "It's beautiful and terrifying," I admitted. "The intimacy is worth the risk, though it's not for everyone." Her silence suggested she was contemplating this, and for a moment, the vast desert around us felt less lonely. I'd almost forgotten our exclusivity was already over. Trying to stay calm while speaking to someone as bizarre as Stella was a challenge, especially with the storm of emotions raging in my head. Love and resentment for Brenda fought for dominance, and a dark part of me began entertaining the idea that Tadwell's demise might not be so bad after all. Stella interrupted my thoughts, her tone oddly comforting. Liquidating him won't fix anything. You've already ruined his reputation. What you need is clarity. Talk to Brenda and understand why she did it. Without answers, you'll never move on. Her insight was unsettling. I don't know how you're reading me so well, I said, shaking my head. But you're right. I'd rather see Tadwell live a long, miserable life. As for Brenda, I can't just switch off my feelings. What we had was rare, alive. Now, it's dead. It's not about pride. It's about trust. I've lost all faith in her. Stella nodded, her sympathy evident. I understand. Do you? I replied sharply, frustrated. Do you understand what it's like to lose something so vital? She stayed silent, her tear-streaked face betraying a hint of sadness. After a moment, she quietly said, I can't reach anyone, no one within thousands of light years. They've probably all been consumed by now. Her admission hit me harder than I expected. You're putting your life in my hands, I asked. She looked up at me, her expression vulnerable. I have no one else. Wonderful. I'd just inherited a stray supermodel from space while trying to cut ties with a cheating wife. My life was spiraling into absurdity. Still, I couldn't abandon Stella. If nothing else, her presence might help in the inevitable divorce proceedings with Brenda. Pulling off the freeway, I headed toward a hotel to figure out our next steps. The Marriott towered nearby, far fancier than my usual choices, but its anonymity appealed to me. I told Stella to wait in the car. When she asked why, I avoided explaining that her stunning looks in that skin-tight outfit might make headlines. Instead, I joked, you never know, authorities might be looking for aliens. Her face paled. I'll wait, she said quickly. I've seen what they do to crash survivors. After securing a room with 2 twin beds, I led Stella up 14 flights of stairs. Watching her graceful movements in that ridiculous suit left my head spinning. Once inside, she explored the room like a child in awe of luxury. Don't you have places like this on your planet? I asked, giving up on rationality. No, she replied. Our population is far larger than yours. We live in small, minimal spaces, more like rodents. It sounded suspiciously like Manhattan, but I let it slide. Try to relax, I said, showing her how to use the TV. She immediately became engrossed in the commercials, particularly the ones for cosmetics. Leaving her entranced, I headed back to my truck. The hour was late, and the exhaustion of the day was catching up with me. Tomorrow would bring the painful task of unraveling my marriage, but tonight I had to prepare. When I arrived home, Brenda was on the couch wearing an old robe. She looked both beautiful and broken. You're finally home, she said softly, sitting up and wiping her eyes. Yes, I replied gently. I came to grab a few things and make arrangements for tomorrow. I also wanted to check on you. She ran to me, burying her face in my chest, sobbing. I'm so sorry, Davy, she cried. I didn't mean for this to happen. I've been such a fool. I held her briefly, stroking her back. It happened, Brenda, I said, my voice firm. Now we have to deal with the fallout. We'll start in the morning. Right now I'm too drained to even think. She pulled back, looking at me with a mixture of desperation and longing. Let's go to bed, she whispered. I want to make it up to you. I shook my head, forcing a weak smile. That's not going to happen, Brenda. I'm taking what I need and heading out. We'll talk later. Her face fell, but I knew I couldn't turn back. The bond we once had was shattered, and no apology could fix that now. The next 15 minutes were unbearable. Brenda, the woman I had loved for nearly a third of my life, trailed after me, crying and begging me not to leave as I packed my clothes, toiletries, and laptop. Finally, I stopped and snapped. What did you expect? Did you think I'd stick around while you had your fun with that jerk? She whimpered. It was only for a couple of weeks. You weren't supposed to find out. I was so careful. Her words confirmed what I suspected. It was deliberate. My heart felt like it had shattered into pieces. I took a deep breath and said coldly, actions have consequences. Now we both lose. I need to leave before I say something I'll regret. Ignoring her wails, I grabbed my things and headed to the truck. As I drove off, my thoughts spiraled. Brenda had no backup plan. She thought she could indulge in her fantasy and return to normalcy without me ever knowing. She convinced herself it was temporary, harmless, justified. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I understood her rationalizations. Still, her betrayal had destroyed something irreplaceable. I reserved my true anger for Richard Tadwell. That slimy opportunist had targeted her, but Brenda's willingness to fall for his act made her equally culpable. The marriage was beyond repair. No apology, no explanation could undo the betrayal. By the time I reached the hotel, it was past 1 a.m. Stella, surprisingly, was still awake. "I knew you'd need comfort after dealing with your wife," she said. Her statement caught me off guard. "How do you even know that?" I asked, suspicious. She looked embarrassed, throwing on a too large hotel robe. "I sensed it. You're torn. You want to stay with her, but don't know how to reconcile the betrayal." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Could she really read my mind? She continued, "It's not about her wanting you. It's the deception and disrespect that you can't forgive. You don't know how to preserve your dignity if you let it slide." I exhaled sharply. She was right. Pride wasn't something you could suppress like other emotions. It shaped who you were. Brenda's actions, calculated and deliberate, demanded a response. The only option that didn't compromise my self-respect was to end the marriage. Even so, forgiving wasn't as simple as forgetting. What could Brenda possibly say to convince me she wouldn't do it again? Nothing. The damage was existential. There was no going back. Stella watched me closely, mirroring my emotions. Finally, she said softly, "I'll be your companion. We're both single now." I didn't respond. It was too much to process. "Can we just sleep?" I asked. She nodded. "I need to quiet my mind. Darkness helps." The next morning, as I prepared to leave, Brenda appeared at the door. She looked defeated. "Polly called me a hoe last night," she admitted. "She saw the video Richard sent out." I froze. "What video?" Her cheeks reddened. "He recorded everything. The texts, the affair. He sent it to everyone, including my friends. Now Polly's divorcing him and the military's investigating. Adultery is a crime, you know," she added quickly. "I haven't spoken to him since this mess exploded. Polly told me everything." I didn't say anything. But one thought was clear. Richard had destroyed not just Brenda's life, but his own. It was a mess I didn't want to be part of anymore. I could have warned Brenda that Turd's troubles were just beginning. My plans for him involved far darker consequences, but those were mine to carry out later. For now, my focus was finding a way to end our marriage with as much dignity as possible. That morning, as we had for 14 years, we sat at the kitchen table with cups of French roast. Brenda looked wrecked. Red, puffy eyes, unkempt hair, and the exhaustion of a sleepless night. I probably looked no better. Betrayal does that to people. Reactions to betrayal vary. Some lash out, breaking things and screaming. Others internalize the pain, letting it simmer into quiet bitterness. Brenda and I weren't the type for tantrums. We were pragmatic, tough enough to face harsh realities head on. We had shared many good years, and neither of us wanted to destroy those memories with unnecessary drama. Finally, Brenda broke the silence. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. She sighed deeply and said, "I knew as soon as I saw the video. He meant nothing to me. That's what makes it so unforgivable." I stared at her, unable to mask my disbelief. She managed a bitter smile. "Honestly, it's for the best. I wouldn't respect you if you wanted to stay." "It wasn't just about the closeness," I said, my voice heavy. "It's the betrayal. The choice to conspire with him." Her face paled and she lowered her head, sobbing into her hands. I waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained. "You're probably wondering when it started. Does it matter?" I asked coldly. "To me it does," she replied quietly. "It proves how foolish I've been." She hesitated before continuing. "The first time it caught me off guard. You'd warned me about Richard, but I thought you were overreacting. He seemed harmless, and I believed his assurances that he wouldn't overstep. But then, one day, as I was washing coffee cups, he came up behind me and kissed me. It wasn't planned. I was confused and stupid." She looked up at me, tears glistening. "You know how physical touch affects me. I wasn't thinking clearly. It wasn't about him. It was the situation. Messy, wrong." Her words hung in the air like a confession. At first, I told myself it would never happen again. But Richard knew exactly what to say. He told me I'd saved his life. He cried. And I let myself believe it was absolution, a way to forgive myself. She grimaced. "It wasn't just that. It was exciting, forbidden. I convinced myself you'd never find out, so it wouldn't hurt you. But I was deluding myself. The seal was broken. I became the deceiver." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "After that, we met 3 more times. It was always the same. Hotels, secrecy. But I never stopped being your wife. I never stopped loving you." Brenda took my hand, her tear-streaked face pleading. "I know what I've done is unforgivable. I take full responsibility. I'll sign whatever agreement you want because I love you, and it's the right thing to do." Her honesty, though painful, was unflinchingly clear. For the first time, I felt something close to admiration for her willingness to own her mistakes. Still, the marriage was over. I stood and said, "I'll contact Jim Eastman to handle the divorce. Since this will be amicable, he can represent both of us. After that, I'm going away for a while. I need space to heal." Brenda touched my cheek, her eyes filled with regret. "I understand," she said softly. "And I'm sorry. If you ever change your mind, I'll be here." As I closed the door behind me, I heard her crying. Once outside, I drove to the nearest park and vomited. The barren landscape ahead felt like a fitting metaphor for the future, empty and desolate. It's strange how morality bends with perspective. I was ending my marriage because Brenda had hidden things from me. Yet here I was, sharing space with Stella, a woman more stunning than Brenda, without her knowing. Who was the liar now? Of course, I couldn't tell Brenda that Stella was an alien or that she claimed to be telepathic. That revelation would have landed me in a padded cell. And convincing her our relationship was platonic? Impossible, especially after seeing Stella. While I had one problem under control, another, far stranger one, loomed. When I returned to the hotel, Stella was still in her oversized robe, transfixed by an episode of Friends. "I'm studying Earth culture," she announced excitedly. "Have you eaten anything?" I asked. "I ate my daily waffle," she said, pointing to her wrist device and producing a half-inch cube. "It's a complete diet." "Does it taste good?" I asked. Her puzzled expression made it clear she didn't understand the question. Why should it? Her answers felt too contrived, like someone performing a bad alien act. "How old are you?" I asked. 277, she replied without taking her eyes off the screen. I smirked. "You look great for your age," she bristled. "I'm not old. I've only lived a quarter of my lifespan." Rather than argue, I suggested, "We'll need to get you new clothes. You can't keep walking around in that suit." "What's wrong with it?" she asked indignantly. "It's the latest in Permer Hick fashion." "It's not exactly Earth standard," I replied. "Let's grab something at Walmart." Her reluctance faded when I reminded her that standing out could lead to unwanted attention. The mention of alien autopsies sealed the deal. At the store, Stella wandered through the aisles like a kid in a candy shop, marveling at the merchandise. She spent hours picking out clothes and cosmetics, referencing things she'd learned from the home shopping network. Her fascination was endearing but exhausting. She stopped traffic everywhere we went, and I worried about being seen with her. Brenda didn't deserve to think I'd replaced her. It wasn't classy. Back at the hotel, Stella beamed as I proposed dinner. "Like on TV?" she asked. She'd seen something similar on Real Housewives and was eager to try Earth food. I agreed, though my mind was preoccupied with divorce plans. It would be straightforward legally, but emotionally, a mess. Richard Tadwell's shadow lingered as a reminder of why I had no choice. When I returned to pick Stella up, she had transformed. She'd applied makeup, likely with a YouTube tutorial, and her beauty was now otherworldly. Her tentative smile belied her nerves. "Do I look okay?" she asked anxiously. She looked breathtaking, but her insecurity reminded me how alien she truly was. "You look fine," I said, downplaying my shock. My main concern was avoiding attention. A woman that beautiful would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer. At the restaurant, far from 5-star to avoid the paparazzi, I ordered the blandest food on the menu. Stella insisted on trying everything, her curiosity as endless as her charm. Watching her sample each dish made me momentarily forget the complications of my life, even if I knew they'd catch up to me soon enough. Stella kept glancing at me, her expression curious, almost expectant. She claimed to be a mind reader, so maybe she already knew what I was about to ask. "So, how do we get you back to your world?" I finally said. Her face fell. "What makes you think I want to go back? Don't you have family or someone waiting for you?" Her expression turned thoughtful. "I've never had a family. On Kashla, children are raised collectively, and there's nothing to return to now. They've probably all moved on." Then she hesitated, her voice soft. "Maybe you're my special someone. Have you thought about that?" I stared at her. "We've known each other for 24 hours. "But I know everything about you," she said matter-of-factly. "You're kind, smart, adventurous. I wouldn't make the same mistake your ex did." Her words stopped me. Could this be a path forward? I decided to test her. "Last night you said you needed to shut off your thoughts. What did you mean?" "Our race communicates telepathically," she explained. "It's like hearing, there's always background noise. Filtering it out on Earth is exhausting. I need to turn off my receptors like you need sleep. Her detailed answer left me stunned. So you're really an alien? Of course, she said cheerfully. Humanoid civilizations are common across the universe. This form is biologically efficient. And White Sands has a portal to your world? There's another at CERN near the Large Hadron Collider, she added casually. Your experiments with particles caught our attention. It hit me. She was serious. Not a creature with big eyes and tiny limbs, but an alien nonetheless. She smiled, sensing my acceptance. Now you believe me. I nodded, though overwhelmed. I do, but let's take things one step at a time. I'm still technically married. Stella looked puzzled, but didn't argue. Her simplicity and genuine nature were disarming. Beneath the alien oddities, she was sweet and sincere, qualities that drew me in from the moment I met her. Over the next 2 weeks, I focused on finding a safe place where Stella could adjust to Earth. We moved out of the hotel, though I still kept her presence discreet. My marriage with Brenda had ended, but I wanted the divorce to remain civil. Bitterness wouldn't serve anyone. During one of our final discussions, Brenda broached the topic of moving on. Davy, I've been asked out, she said hesitantly. Do you think it's okay if I start dating? Her question wasn't patronizing, it was respectful. I smiled and replied, You've been a wonderful wife, and any man would be lucky to have you. It's time for us both to move forward. She looked at me with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I wish things had been different, her eyes seemed to say. We need a fresh start, I added gently. The bond we once had was broken, and trying to restore it would only create an imperfect shadow of the past. Stella gave me hope for a brighter future, and I wanted the same for Brenda. Stella might have come from a distant galaxy, but her demeanor was down to earth, more small-town Nebraska than sci-fi alien. Cheerful, curious, and unassuming, she lacked the aloofness one might expect from an interstellar traveler. Still, I had to remind her to stay out of my head. She checked in on me constantly, like a loyal golden retriever seeking reassurance. I rented a house in Sandia Heights, a quiet area near the National Lab. It gave Stella space to adapt without prying neighbors, and I worked out a deal to buy the property after my divorce. Settling in with Stella helped dull the ache of losing Brenda. Stella's world was advanced but dystopian, overpopulated, polluted, and dominated by rigid systems. People lived in domed cities, assigned roles at birth, and operated within strict confines. As a transportation console operator, Stella knew plenty about her world's tech, but little about creating or controlling it. Now, in a far simpler place, she struggled to adapt. She spent hours online, learning to navigate social media and life on Earth. Compared to her implanted tech, she found smartphones laughably primitive. As Stella adjusted, I began taking her out. One evening, we dined at Antiquity, a favorite spot from my days with Brenda. Stella wore a simple black dress and pearls, her stunning beauty drawing stares from everyone in the restaurant. Yet she seemed oblivious to the attention, focused entirely on me. While we shared carpaccio, a familiar voice interrupted. Hi, Davy. I knew I'd run into you eventually. Brenda stood beside our table, cheerful as ever, with her fiancé in tow. I stood and introduced them. Stella, this is Brenda, my ex-wife. Stella smiled warmly. It's nice to meet you, Brenda. Davy speaks highly of you. Brenda's expression faltered, overwhelmed by Stella's radiant presence. She introduced her fiancé, Tom Holland, a powerful real estate developer and potential Senate candidate. We exchanged polite pleasantries before they retreated to their table, Tom stealing one last glance at Stella. After they left, Stella commented lightly, She regrets losing you, and that man has quite the imagination. Our dinner had a deeper purpose. I turned to Stella and said, Here, we have a ceremony to signify a bond between two people. I pulled out a ring, surprising her. We don't have guarantees like your implants, but I promise to be faithful until my dying breath. Her response was an overwhelming wave of love. That night, we made love for the first time, a moment both thrilling and nerve-wracking. A month after the divorce was finalized, Stella and I held a private ceremony to commit to each other. She didn't like the word married, saying it didn't capture her feelings. To her, we were bonded in a way that transcended labels. Our ceremony took place on a cliff in the Sandia Mountains. As the sun set over the desert, the city lights below began to twinkle in the growing darkness. Stella was captivated. Her world, though advanced, was bleak. A price paid for progress. Here, she found wonder in even the simplest things. Earth was a place of discovery, and Stella embraced it with joy. Instead of a white dress, Stella wore hiking gear. We climbed Knife Edge Rock, a trail meant for seasoned climbers, but she handled it effortlessly. Her physical abilities, along with her mind-reading and otherworldly qualities, were still something I was adjusting to. At the summit, we dangled our legs over the edge, watching the July evening melt into hues of purple and red. Stella lay beside me, holding my hand. As the first stars appeared, she pointed to the Pleiades and whispered, "Focus on it." I did, and in that moment, I felt her presence in my mind, anchoring a deep, loving connection. "This will bind us forever," she said softly. That was our wedding, a simple, unconventional ceremony under the stars. For nearly a year, life was filled with joy and adventure. But as always, happiness invites chaos. One sunny fall afternoon, I came home to find Stella in the kitchen with the most strikingly handsome man I'd ever seen. He wore the same sleek suit Stella had arrived in. She looked uneasy as she said, "Davy, we need to talk." My stomach sank, though the little mental beacon we shared reassured me. Still, my pulse quickened as she introduced him. "This is Kal-El. He's come to take me back to NVIDIA." Kal-El scoffed. "She doesn't belong here. It's illegal for her to stay." "She's my wife," I argued. "She's not going anywhere." Kal-El's smirk was condescending. "She cannot bond with a primitive species. Either she comes willingly or I'll take her by force." He grabbed Stella's arm, and despite her protests, began dragging her toward the backyard. I knew I couldn't physically stop him. Instead, I pointed to the security camera in the corner. "Everything you've done is recorded. If you're trying to keep your race a secret, how do you think your bosses will react to seeing you on TMZ and every news network on Earth?" Kal-El froze, glancing at the camera. I pressed on. "It's streaming to the cloud. You can't erase it. Smile. You're already famous." He dropped Stella's arm and turned to me, pulling out a sleek pen-shaped device. "You won't be reporting anything if you're vaporized." Before I could react, there was a loud clang. Kal-El's eyes went blank, and he crumpled to the floor. Stella stood behind him, wielding a cast-iron skillet like a tennis pro. The little beacon in my head radiated triumph as she said, "I was always afraid someone would come. I think we're finally safe." Safe, but with a new problem. The body. We decided to bury him in Golden, a nearby ghost town that had been abandoned after its gold rush days. The town's old cemetery, hidden near a restored church, provided the perfect spot for an unmarked grave. We worked quietly, the weight of the situation sinking in. For now, we had protected our life together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our challenges were far from over. Stella and I drove 30 miles into the desert with Kulali's lifeless body secured in the back like a prop from a dark comedy. The ghost town we chose was as deserted as expected. Under the truck's headlights, we dragged him through the dry scrub to an old cemetery. Digging was easy in the sandy soil. Without fingerprints or identification, he'd remain a mystery, if ever found. By 10 p.m., the task was done. Back home, I collapsed into a chair while Stella sat serenely on the couch, as if nothing had happened. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked. "You just liquidated someone." Stella's voice was calm, resolute. "There's nothing to discuss. I couldn't leave you, so I did what had to be done." "How do you feel?" I pressed. She sighed, her tone firm. "Enough, Snowflake. Kulali was going to eliminate you. I'm loyal to you and I promise to stand by you, no matter what." In that moment, her love and loyalty became undeniably clear. No matter where she came from, she understood what it meant to care for someone. Years passed and we grew older together. Stella, fascinated by aging, explained how her people had perfected ways to reverse its effects. While I grew weaker, she remained breathtaking, untouched by time. My dedication to fitness only delayed the inevitable. When my health began to fail, Stella took charge. One evening, she loaded me into the truck and drove us to the place where we first met. Under a desert sky filled with stars, we began the long, grueling trek to the obelisk at Trinity. Stella supported me the entire way, her strength unwavering. By the time we reached the monument, I was near collapse. She helped me sit against the black stone, then walked a few yards ahead and activated her device. The air shimmered and the stars faded into a swirling galaxy. Returning to my side, she said softly, "We'll make you well again, my love." The shimmering curtain widened, and two figures stepped through, a man and a woman, youthful and radiant. For a moment, they stood together, gazing at the vast night sky. Then, hand in hand, they began the walk toward the distant road. As they walked, she asked, her voice full of familiar doubt, "Do you think the truck will start?" He smiled patiently. "Of course it will. Now let's have breakfast. We have our whole lives ahead of us."